Hello, everybody. Javy Martinez. I will be your host today and tomorrow for the Glorium Technologies Virtual Summit, HealthTech 2022 and 2023, how technology is changing the healthcare industry. Really excited to get going today, and we have 6 amazing speakers that will be chatting today with us, and as well as tomorrow. So just to give you a little bit of rundown of how the event will work out today. For day one, you'll be starting with me, the host, and then we'll be going into our introductory speech with Andrei, the co-founder and CEO of Glorium Technologies. And then we have a lineup full of rock stars that will be joining us today. We have Dr. Ingrid Feltes, we have Michelle Perugini, and Joseph Schneider for the morning session. And then we'll take a quick little coffee break, and we will have Glen Schuster, Vasiliu-Feltes, and Blair Butterfield as our last speaker of the day before we wrap up. And then tomorrow, we'll be starting at the same time with Brian Woodham, and followed by Brian Rusin, Dr. Amit Sawant, and Dr. Martin Gresham. And we will follow up with Rodrigo Hutt and Michael Loon as the last speaker, and we'll hear final word from the co-founder and CTO of Glorium Technologies, Dimitri. So thank you so much for joining me and us today. If you want to put in the comments where you're calling in from, this is my 6th time with Glorium Technologies hosting this event for them this year. I'm really excited. It's always a great time. They always have amazing speakers providing a lot of insight. This video will be recorded and it's live streamed right now on YouTube and social. So if you have any friends in the health tech or startup, or just, always looking for a great way to learn new things, have them join us, and feel free to share our link and everything that we've posted on social. So really excited to get going. I will be joined by Andrei, our first speaker here shortly. Andrei, how's it going?
Going good. Hey, Javy, how are you doing?
Good. Look a little different than last time.
Yeah. Well, last time, I don't know. It's already what you said, 6th time this year,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it's definitely, I'm really excited. Looks like we're rocking and rolling. So we'll continue the trend, definitely.
Absolutely. It's funny because, I was talking to my wife recently, and I'm a huge believer that everyone is one tweet, one picture, one video, one DM away from changing the trajectory of their life. And for me, I hate public speaking, but I know that it's an important part of, in my role that I, whether at the accelerator or within my startups, but I just wouldn't do it. Something wouldn't let me do it. And then you reached out, back, I think it was earlier this year, and I wasn't going to do it, but then something inside told me to do it. And now we're here 6 events later. And, that all came because of a DM that you sent me. So one, thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful. It's been a lot of fun and insightful, and I can't wait to continue it.
You're welcome. And of course, thanks a lot to you for helping us to bring those events live and to host those events. Definitely a good, great help.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a great lineup today. Y'all did every event we have an amazing lineup, but just this one in particular has a bunch of rock stars in it. So I'm really excited to get going. So if you're okay, I'm gonna let you kind of take over and introduce yourself, and I will be back to introduce the next speaker.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks. So once again, hey everyone. I am I'm very happy to open our HealthTech Summit. It's already a sixth event for our company virtual summit during this year. But for HealthTech Summit specifically, it's a second. It's a second event. We did the previous one at exactly the same time last year. So it's becoming an annual event, and we'll definitely continue the trend. We want to make it happen every year. Looks like there is help that our audience is getting and receiving, and good information that our audience is receiving from our speakers, from the information that they consume from this event. So definitely good. We're going to be going and continue, hopefully year after year. Sure. So to briefly introduce myself, I am Andrei Kasyanau. I am a CEO of Glorium Technologies. And so Glorium Technologies, amongst other things, actually specializes in software development for the health tech industry. So we work with with a lot of different startups that are building digital products in health tech. And that's actually one of the reasons why we are looking into this area and why we're organizing those events. Now, what to expect from this summit? Very briefly, again, it goes into what and how we do with our clients. And actually, we not only provide the service to build the digital products, but we're also helping our startups with product management, with compliance, certifications, with business consulting, also even like providing the breach investments and guidance to the health tech startups to bring them to the next level. And naturally, we hold many of the conversations with founders and product owners and in this area, and with many of them concerned about the future turns of the market and what exactly going to happen. And they're asking us all of those questions. And we very often hold conversations on this topic. But the problem is we're not the single source of truth. And instead of us just providing the market overview or overview of specific technologies or what is going to affect the market, we decided to gather other people around and create a virtual summit in order to provide a specific advice and the information about different topics to uncover those to our clients and our potential clients and in general the audience. Now you're saying you can say that there are many other different conferences and summits on the topic of health tech. You're definitely going to be right, and I myself participating in quite many of them. Will love to listen what other people say, but one of the things that we do, we focus on startups. So everything and anything that you're going to hear today and what this whole virtual summit is about, in one or another respect, it's going to touch on the startups topic, and it's definitely all of this is going to be helpful for the startup founders and product owners and CEOs and CDOs, of course. Okay, so this is how we decided to make our focus in order to be unique in this market. Now, going back to the health tech market, let me share with you just a couple of my thoughts on where we are now, in order just to set the stage for our wonderful speakers and kind of to make a statement on the trend, opportunities, and challenges. And so, first of all, since we're talking about the startups and we're focusing around startups, actually, let's talk And let's talk about funding. Let's review this topic. So we all know that this year brought us, in general for the startups and for the funding, it brought us quite a gloomy picture, and all of the outlooks are also quite gloomy. I mean, the same. And so we all know about the global drop in funding and tons of tech layoffs. And health tech is right in the middle of all of those events. And even though it's quite a resilient industry, but still. So if we take a look at what's happening right now in the startup market and in the funding. So, like according to CB Insights report, the global digital health funding continued to slide also in Q3 of 2022. And it is for Q3, it is 4.6 billion, which is actually 36% less quarter over quarter, and 72% drop actually from its all-time high in Q2 of 21. And the number of mega rounds, those that are valued of more than 100 millions, dropped to its lowest total since Q1 2019. And the funding itself, it fell by 37%. So both deals and funding have fallen by more than 80% from their all-time highs in Q2 of 2021. So what else interesting? Another interesting picture, which is giving just a little bit of hope, is that after Q2 of 2022 saw the lowest number of IPOs, which was only one in the last 5 years, the IPOs rebounded actually in Q3 of 22 to 7, and is the highest quarterly total for this year, year of 2022. So and this brings actually the total number of IPOs to a level comparable to 2019. So that's about funding. Now about tech layoffs. So according to layoffs.fyi resource, health tech industry actually saw almost 10,000 layoffs in 2022, which puts it on the 5th place amongst other industries, which is, I would say, not that bad. There are other industries that did much worse than health tech. And especially considering that the total number of tracked tech layoffs in 2022 is more than 120,000. So again, health tech is 10,000, the total is 120,000. So health tech accounts for less than 10% of layoffs during this year in startup industry. So now at the same time, if we take a look at the market predictions paint an absolutely different picture. So the report data are different. So if you take a look, depending on who you ask, what kind of report you look at, but they all have a positive trend in common. Like here is one of the less optimistic reports by Global Market Insights, which says that global digital health market size was 195 billion in 2021, and it is predicted to grow at 16% of compounded annual growth rate until 2030. And with 2030 expected size being around $780 billion. So this is, I would say, this is definitely good news. Not actually news. All those predictions stay the same. So I checked the numbers with the last year, and the deviation is really minimal. So we're still on track for the global digital health market growth. And the predictions, the numbers actually in those predictions, they didn't change much year over year. And interestingly, out of this whole market of global digital health, North America takes about 45% share. So you know where to invest, right? So, of course, everyone is free to make their own conclusions from those numbers, but my opinion is that healthcare market is very resilient. It is one of those like real economies, and we clearly see it growing. The setback in the funding, my opinion, again, purely my opinion, is temporary. And the big guys will definitely soon be back for their share in this big global digital health pie. So right now, again, it's around 200 billion a year, and by 2030, it's expected to be 780 billion a year. It's a huge pie. I just don't see how venture capitalists or other investors are going to miss on the opportunities to invade this market. So again, the setback I think is a temporary. It's not going to be long, I think, until we start seeing the increase in the startup funding in HealthTech again. So now, just to give kind of my thoughts about where we're heading, and what is actually not where we're heading, but what is fueling the growth. The picture is as following. According to all of the to multiple different reports, I try to do the analysis, combine all the data, and looks like the main factors, the main drivers of the growth of this global digital health market are number one is increasing usage of tablets, smartphones, and other mobile platforms. We see that the numbers show that every year we have an increase of the mobile users, right? And this is definitely putting more and more pressure on digital healthcare sector. So people want to be closer to their data. They want to track. They want to participate in their treatment process, right? So all of those. This factor will definitely play a role in increasing the market. Now, the second factor, which actually is a kind of the reason why number one is growing, is a growing population. You also just recently, several days ago, it was announced that the population of the planet Earth has grown to 8 billion people, and it continues growing. So, of course, more of the people, more of the healthcare, right? So this is definitely one of the factors. Then expansion of healthcare IT infrastructure in industrialized nations, also definitely contributing, and the favorable government initiatives in the US and European region, they allow for more and more of the digital healthcare expansion. Now, next one is robust demand for remote patient monitoring services. Actually, this one is big. This one is huge. And according to the reports, some of the reports say that the total revenue in global digital healthcare market is taken, like half of it is about the remote patient monitoring services, telehealth, and all of the other related services. And of course, the last point is venture capital investments, which we see there is right now a setback, but until 2030, I think we'll see it growing. Now, just a couple of words on the challenges that I think we're all gonna see in this digital healthcare market, and we'll observe during the next year. I think number one of the biggest challenges is the increasing capital expenditure and the maintenance requirements. They're actually fueled partially by the market itself, but mostly by the regulatory risks and limitations. So we are seeing this like never-ending fight between the innovators and conservative, inert, and inefficient healthcare systems globally and in the US in particular. And we'll see it. I think we'll see it continuing. Now, number two, I think from the challenges is the security concerns regarding patient data. So, and security in general in the healthcare market, we see it being one of the biggest problems that the healthcare is currently solving. The funding and the number of startups is really growing in this area, and we see enterprises are concerned more and more with security year after year. And the last, I think, challenge is labor shortage. It has definitely eased from the last year, but we still see that the labor shortage is affecting the healthcare market. Still, there are not enough people, not enough qualified people, not enough qualified specialists in order to produce the digital impact in healthcare, the one that is currently required by the market. So this problem will continue affecting the startups and other innovators negatively. But it's definitely much easier and the problem is much smaller than the last year. We saw with all of those, especially tech layoffs, the availability of the people on the market is higher, but still it continues to be a problem. So there are definitely more of the other challenges, but I think those are the biggest ones that we'll see that the health tech will experience and will have to fight during the next year. So that was kind of my very brief overview of where we are right now and what is happening with the market. But I definitely hope that our speakers will go in details into each and every area of healthcare and tell us in more details about their experience from the trenches, experience that they had with their startups, with the work with their clients or consulting work, and what they see as from their point of view as the trends and the solutions for all the problems and issues that we currently have in the health tech. All right. So I'm very excited and really excited to hear what they have prepared. And so, okay, let's roll. Javy, back to you, I guess.
Thank you, Andrei. No, it's amazing. I think the world of startups is changing rapidly. And whoa, my camera was off. I'm sorry. World of startups is changing rapidly. So I think always providing as much value and just understanding every angle. With especially in healthcare, things are changing so rapidly, and things like COVID just throw in a curveball. So I think today is going to be an amazing day. We're going to have a bunch of great value. And I think overall, if you have the opportunity to, just sit there and listen, I know a lot of people like to take notes, but sometimes it's just okay to sit there and listen, and just comprehend it. That's why we record these, and so we can put them back on YouTube and live stream them so people can go back and reference them. So, I'm really excited to announce this first speaker. If you're ready to roll on it, I will, I'll bring on Dr. Ingrid. Let's see here. So our first speaker today will be Dr. Ingrid. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yes, I can.
Can you hear me well? Awesome.
I sure can. I can hear you okay.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, awesome. And I'm ready to share the screen when you're done.
Yeah, I'm just gonna let you introduce yourself, and then you have a hard stop at 9:55. So I don't know if you want to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A, however you want to roll. But Dr. Ingrid today will be talking to us about Zero Trust for Healthcare 4.0. Really excited about that. Dr. Ingrid, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be part of this summit again. I enjoyed it last year very much. Today, I represent Softred as the CEO, and we're excited to share with you a presentation that will emphasize the need for zero trust cybersecurity in healthcare. I also have the privilege of serving as the Chief Innovation Officer for the Government Blockchain Association, which is a not-for-profit organization that has more than 67 chapters around the world, and also serve as an expert advisor for the European Union Blockchain Observatory and Forum. Those are all relevant for our meeting today. What I will do, I'll briefly share a few slides, and then we'll go from there. Please also let me know if you cannot see the slides or if you do not hear me well. The industrial and healthcare evolution and how they went in parallel for a long time and what we're observing now. Then healthcare 4.0 trends, how we can leverage Web 3.0, zero trust cybersecurity details, emphasis that we need to all work on, and then future directions. I wanted to start with just a brief highlight on why are we even talking about zero trust and why not be aware in calendar year 2022 is $4.35 million per breach. This is an increase from last year when we were at $3.49 million. So as you can see, massive year. The global negative economic impact from all cybersecurity data breaches worldwide is estimated to be $6 trillion. In this type of economy, you can imagine what other beautiful things we could do with $6 trillion instead of having them due to data breaches. Then why is it important to talk about zero trust in healthcare? Well, just two stats to give you a hint. In calendar year 2021, we don't have the full data for 2022 yet, but it will be out soon. Healthcare had the highest total average data breach cost of any industry, and the number is staggering, as you can see. Additionally, 44 million, close to 45 million health records were exposed or stolen in 2021, despite all our safeguards, making it the second highest year for breach records in the history. Here are a few additional key changes that we've seen over the last few months. We've always cared about privacy. We always tried to prevent data breaches, but now we have even more push from a regulatory perspective to do more than what we've ever done. And here are just a few highlights. I would call your attention to the framework published by NIST that is specifically emphasizing zero trust. Also, ISO and IEC 27001 standard, which is very important for privacy and security, the FDA regulatory guidelines for cybersecurity, and a few others. Very important for us to change the paradigm moving forward and not only do the traditional cybersecurity programs, but also engage in these zero trust customized solutions that can really prevent and mitigate cyber threats. I would also like to highlight that the whole, like Andrei just mentioned, the investment ecosystem has also realized that cybersecurity is very important. Cybersecurity is actually on the top of the agenda of most C-suites worldwide, and therefore you see that venture capital has invested massively, not only in total amount of dollars, but also in the number of deals and in the size of each deal. Additionally, the mergers and acquisitions ecosystem is also very active, as you can see on the screen. 77.5 billion in deals across 286 transactions. And these are numbers just from 2020, which are full. Soon we're going to have also 2021 and 2022. As you know, these happen over a period of time. And now I would like to share a few of the elements when we examine industrial and healthcare evolutions, how they've evolved in parallel and what is happening now. When we look at the industrial revolution, you all are very familiar. We went from mechanization to mass production, electrical engineering, to automation, computers, electronics, and now we are in cyber physical systems and Internet of Things era. There are many experts who also state that Web 3.0 will thrust us into the next industrial revolution. Additionally, healthcare has evolved in parallel. As you can see, we went from Healthcare Revolution 1.0 when we focused on our own organizations to Healthcare 2.0 where we focused on inter-organizations data sharing. Then we evolved on focusing on national programs, big data, data exchanges between many institutions and patient portals. And Healthcare 4.0 was characterized by global AI-powered and real-time intelligence, as well as a push towards remote monitoring. Again, global experts are suggesting that we're also at the cusp of the next healthcare revolution, or I like to call it renaissance. And again, we will highlight how Web 3.0 can or cannot help with this next revolution. Here is another important parallel that we would like to draw. As you can see, there are many commonalities, and cybersecurity is at the top, as we highlighted. Of course, IoT and a focus on remote connectivity is also something that strikes us in both. What are now some specific healthcare 4.0 trends that we wanted to highlight? I know this is a busy slide, but I think it's important to see the massive amount of technology and the trends that we're encountering. So not only do we see an emphasis on digital identity and biometrics, data fabric, cybersecurity mesh, privacy enhancing computations, and hyper-automation and so forth, but also the behaviors and the types of exchanges are also on anyone's radar currently. So we have to increase the ability to share data amongst not only all key stakeholders in the ecosystem, but also with novel entrants into the healthcare ecosystem. As we've seen, there are numerous companies that used to never be in health tech, and now they're actually trying to make their entry. So hyperconnectivity, consumer centricity, cyber AI defense systems, zero trust solutions, enterprise AI deployments, enterprise blockchain deployments are currently visible in the health tech ecosystem. And just a few years ago, no one would ever talk about any of these. Additionally, when we look at the rest of the industry, the focus on autonomic systems, generative AI, bioprinting, renewable power has started to also infuse the healthcare ecosystem through our vendors, suppliers, strategic partners, as well as a variety of applications that are part of the rest of the health tech ecosystem, even if not directly involved in care delivery. I would also like to highlight the fact that we see more and more smart devices. It's estimated that we have about 2 billion smart devices currently connected. Also, space travel. I was shocked recently. I went to a space conference and more than half was dedicated to space health. And I had not been aware of that. So it was intriguing to see the major advances we're making in that domain as well. I also have seen increased publications and increased conferences focusing on how we can leverage quantum technologies in health tech. And as we just mentioned, major emphasis on what Web 3.0 transition can bring to us and how we need to adjust. So what are some of the top technologies now driving healthcare 4.0? This list was created after reviewing all major consulting groups and all major publications that we all follow. And I just made a summary out of all of them and selected the ones that consistently rank high. So for instance, artificial intelligence portfolio tools are consistently ranked in the top. No matter what source you're looking at, they will always be in the top 3. Blockchain and digital ledger technologies have risen in rank. They used to be at the bottom and were even challenged many years. AR, VR, XR, and holograms are also on the rise. Nanotechnology and nanomedicine, I would say, is having a renaissance. We used to see that 10 years ago quite a lot, and then there was a silence for a while, but now we're seeing absolute major advances, and that's probably related to the advances in material sciences. Next generation sequencing and genomic medicine, same thing due to the massive advancements in the technology that we have. Additionally, probably the Nobel Prize in Medicine for CRISPR has helped as well, but we see tremendous increases in adoption for next generation sequencing. And then, of course, wearable sensors, bioimplants, robotics, exoskeletons, and so forth. As you can see, the list is very long. For now, we mentioned, of course, the beautiful tech trends, but as we all know, we have a lot of challenges when we deal with health technologies. We continue to see a massive digital divide that has prevented adoption as much as we would have hoped when we create all these health technologies. Also, digital literacy and digital fluency are ongoing problems, and that includes not only the consumers, but also healthcare providers. Depending on the demographic within healthcare practitioners, you can see that many still struggle with using technology, embedding technology in their current workflows, and really achieving the kind of optimal performance that we all hope for. Because the reason why we created health tech in the first place was to augment human intelligence and human capabilities, not decrease their performance. Of course, we also continue to see a health equity divide, and over the last year, I would say we have seen tremendous push to improve that situation. Ongoing financial divide, there continues to be, unfortunately, a quite large segment of the population that cannot afford their care, and there are several startups that are trying to address that as well. Cybersecurity, as we just highlighted, ethics breaches, lack of digital trust, and cultural barriers. On the counter side, we also have a lot of opportunities to these challenges. So we can do a better job at repairing digital trust. We can have an enhanced health data ownership. And I would say the startup ecosystem this past 2 years has brought us numerous startups that are focusing exclusively on how to increase access to data, how to increase ownership of data, how patients can be self-sovereign in managing their data. And that also leads us to the opportunity to enable health data monetization. And that is currently, again, on the agenda for many, not only startups, but also larger enterprises, to see how they can leverage the current technology to monetize their data. We must continue to work to improve safety. We continue in the United States to spend 49 cents out of every dollar on adverse events and iatrogenic healthcare issues, despite all our efforts. And also, we continue to have rural areas where numerous patients do not have access to care. We must continue to work together to improve outcomes and experience, redesign healthcare delivery, building a culture of digital ethics and cyber resilience. And of course, for those of you that might not be aware, but the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals alignment is currently very important. The National Institute of Health has also published a 2030 agenda that focuses on sustainable health. And of course, as we've seen in the pandemic, a lot of human rights were violated. So there are a lot of organizations that are trying now to do a better job how we can use technology to align ourselves with the United Nations human rights agenda and safeguard those human rights instead of violating them. So we referenced Web 3.0 quite a lot. So how can we leverage Web 3.0 and what do we need to do from a cybersecurity perspective to not have even more data breaches? Just to first highlight, I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware what we're referencing when we're saying Web 3.0. So it's the next iteration of the World Wide Web, which will be decentralized, open, and of greater utility. That's what our intent is. It's uniquely situated at the intersection of the next industrial and healthcare revolution because, as we mentioned, it can offer opportunities not only for data ownership and data monetization, but also of a whole new way of preserving privacy and enhancing security. These are some of the zero trust cybersecurity domains that when we transition to Web 3.0, we must take into consideration. And some revolve around technology, some revolve around the experience that our healthcare providers and healthcare consumers will have, as well as all other key stakeholders in the ecosystem, how they will interact with Web 3.0. Of course, the architecture, very important. And then the human-computer interface will be essential because that's what Web 3.0 will allow more than ever, a totally different immersive experience. Similarly, the way we examined the industrial revolution and healthcare evolution, we also need to look at the web evolution and how did we get to Web 2.0 and what are we hoping to achieve with Web 3.0. Just a brief recap, Web 1.0, we had basic web pages, HTML and portals. We could mostly just have read-only interaction, more of a directory access like a virtual yellow pages, banner advertisings, and very limited internet access. Then we evolved to Web 2.0 to have much more user-generated content. We got into the era of blogs and content sharing and tagging, mobile access, apps increased more than ever before. High-speed communications are now an expectation. And of course, we witnessed global internet access. With Web 3.0, all experts hope to also have much more immersion and live streams, smart applications, increased user engagement, behavioral advertising, semantic web capabilities, and so forth. So what makes Web 3.0 so unique? Here is just a mini infographic for our audience to just get the basics. I would encourage you to look up many of the wonderful infographics that are much more detailed on Web 3.0 as well. But for our general audience, I wanted to highlight that, of course, we'll have the core powered by blockchain, AI, and we're hoping to also have increased peer-to-peer networking and increased connectivity and ubiquity. So what will the impact of Web 3.0 be, and specifically, why do we care about it in healthcare? It is expected that it will redesign, recalibrate, and completely disrupt health and wellness from a people, process, as well as products and services perspective. That's why we see so many startups in the ecosystem pushing to transition to Web 3.0 and offering a whole plethora of services that will be powered by Web 3.0. When we look at the ecosystem, so far, we already see startups in each of these domains. Startups that are hoping to increase wellness, prevention of disease, surveillance of disease, improving diagnosis or treatment, as well as assisting us in augmenting our current disease management methods. And many are already, of course, using genomics and other scientific advances that can help us rethink longevity and how we think about disease versus aging. Numerous experts already state that if Web 3.0 transition is successful, we might actually have it power healthcare not only 4.0, but 5.0. And here are some suggestions of how healthcare 5.0 would be defined. Some experts think that equitable health will be the one that will define healthcare 5.0. The same way we used to have value-based care and population health before, now it would be a focus on equitable health. Additionally, the National Institute of Health has also published a 2030 agenda that is uniquely focused on precision health and smart personalized health. It's essential to take a look at some of the regulatory guidelines and frameworks that are being built, because all of them are focusing on precision medicine and how smart healthcare can become a standard of care. As we highlighted when we examined the evolution of the industrial revolution as well as the healthcare revolution, interconnectivity is at the crux of all of this, and specifically human technical interaction. This infographic very nicely highlights how almost every domain in the health tech ecosystem has been touched by this interconnectivity. And of course, that increases our cyber vulnerabilities. This is why when we started this presentation, we highlighted the increase in cyber threats, increase in success of the cyber attacks, the cost of those cyber attacks, and the massive amounts of not only humans affected, but also organizations that suffered in reputation, of course, damages. When we talk about Web 3.0, I wanted to also take the opportunity to highlight the difference between Web 3.0, which is a tech architecture, and then the metaverse, which you probably heard about, which is, if you will, a simple analogy could be the old UI UX, the way we interact with this new Web 3.0 ecosystem. One of the definitions that you'll find is that the metaverse can be defined as a simulated digital environment that uses augmented reality, virtual reality, and blockchain, along with concepts borrowed from social media to create spaces for rich user interaction mimicking the real world. And again, I caution that there are numerous definitions out there. What's very important is to not confuse Web 3.0 with the metaverse. Both have been at the crux of a lot of healthcare startups, and there are even several larger organizations that have started to promote health metaverse, and even some hospitals that are uniquely already powered by a metaverse environment. When we examine the layers of the metaverse, again, you'll find numerous infographics out there, and I caution you not to obsess over which one is correct or not correct. And more importantly, look at the structure. You'll usually have 7, 9, 10 layers. Everybody publishes a different infographic, but the core is to pay attention which ones of the layers are related to the technology, which ones of the layers are related to the experience, and which ones of the layers are related to the apps that will build all around this ecosystem. And then you'll see it's very easy to understand. As you can see in this specific example, this unique infographic published, it has 7 layers, and you can see how it has concentric circles that highlight the infrastructure, then the human interface, the decentralized component, the importance of spatial computing, the opportunity of a creator economy to be part of the healthcare ecosystem, the discovery, which is, of course, the social aspects, and experience. We have a tremendous opportunity to use gamification to our advantage in healthcare over the next decade or so. Additionally, you might hear the term omniverse, and that also requires a lot of cybersecurity, of course. It's a term coined by NVIDIA, and as you can see, their definition is very simple. That is also very much talked about in large healthcare deployments when we think about health hospital systems, health communities, smart health cities. Omniverse is probably a more relevant conversation to be had. We're not going to focus on a DAO. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that when we talk about a new healthcare environment like Healthcare 4.0, we must also rethink governance, and that would also help us with cybersecurity threats, of course. As I mentioned, when we think about personalized medicine and health with all these new users in the healthcare ecosystem now being part of this new ecosystem, that increases our cyber vulnerabilities. Like we highlighted, of course, it will also allow each user to maybe monetize their data and own their data, but that also makes them highly vulnerable to malicious actors. So having zero trust for personalized medicine and health is more important than ever. Same applies for equitable health. The most sensitive data are socioeconomic data, the determinants of health that were always protected like a golden egg now will be available in much more databases because we're focusing on equitable health, which again means that we need to safeguard that data more than ever. Same as we mentioned, there is a tremendous push towards smart clinics, smart homes, smart operating rooms, smart hospitals. That also is amazing for our progress and to deliver better care, but also again opens up endless possibilities for malicious cyber attacks. So zero trust for these type of hospital rooms and smart operating rooms will be essential. This is just one example how Siemens is imagining a smart hospital connected care model. And just imagine every single one of these interaction points and every single one of these devices can be the source of a cyber attack. Same thing for smart homes. As we know, a lot of healthcare devices and of course the ecosystem in the startup world is focusing heavily to provide a variety of opportunities for smart home healthcare. That also opens up the opportunities for cyber threats. So we must have customized engineering solutions that help safeguard these. I would also like to call your attention to the opportunity we have for creating digital health twins and how they can help us specifically for cyber threats, not only for improving outcomes, which was my original passion, and that's the focus of another keynote, how we can leverage digital health twins to improve safety, to improve outcomes, and how to also redesign healthcare completely from an administrative perspective. But today I wanted to highlight the power of digital health twins to help us with cybersecurity attacks. Here are just some examples of digital twins for those of you that might not be aware yet that huge progress has been made. We already have a digital twin of a heart, lungs, and a company is working very heavily on having a neuro digital twin. So what are some of the concerns for cybersecurity and cyber resilience? As we mentioned, healthcare in this new ecosystem for healthcare 4.0 has a variety of wearable sensors, telehealth, apps, biometrics, smart wallets, everything we just emphasized, that will expose us to all these threats, and we must be very much focused on providing not only cybersecurity, but also cyber resilience programs. Here are just some examples of the existing metaverse hospitals, and all of these already have efforts towards building zero trust. So we talked a lot about this zero trust cybersecurity. So what is it? What are the principles that are at the foundation of a zero trust environment? And as you can see, all data and services are considered resources. All communications are secured regardless of location. Access to enterprise resources is session-based. Access to resources is determined dynamically. We must have, when we develop zero trust solutions, a continuous security posturing, strict authorization and access enforcement, integration with enterprise detection and response. And in very simple terms, I like to always summarize it. You trust no one and verify everybody. And then it's very easy to understand. What are some of our challenges when we design zero trust engineering solutions? We must convey to those business partners that it's not a plug and play, like you order an iPhone in a box and can plug it in. You must develop not only a zero trust architecture, but create a cyber safety culture in the organization and a cyber resilience program, not just a cyber security program to determine when you had breaches. You want to be able to sustain and build a long-term, dynamically adaptable cyber resilience model. Also, harmonizing your cyber program with your ethics program is essential. When we do the analysis and the root cause of all the data breaches, more than 90% due to interoperability challenges and a lack of harmonization between cyber programs and ethics programs, not to mention a lack of collaboration between HR, ethics, cyber, data teams, and so forth. Additionally, we continue to have the challenges, of course, of portability and cost. As we mentioned, when we examine the whole ecosystem with all the things we mentioned so far in terms of the healthcare trends and the challenges, we have an opportunity to deploy these modern tools such as digital cyber twins, to build smart cyber resilient cities from the beginning, and we're talking about health cities as well, and to also build smart cybersecurity for Web 3.0 for this new healthcare ecosystem. And as we mentioned, although not everybody is familiar, but push towards net zero and push towards sustainable health is on the agenda of the World Health Organization as well as the National Institute of Health. Very quickly, the solutions we have is to bridge the cyber literacy divide, enhance cyber fluency, increase collaboration, stimulate investments, design new cyber standards, design new cyber metrics, and develop customized zero trust solutions. And I'm very proud to say that I'm part of a team that has developed zero trust solutions, and we're looking forward to collaborating with all of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts. Thank you.
Dr. Ingrid, thank you so much for all that information. I really liked, I wasn't able to catch it at the end. If you don't mind repeating it again, you said, I forget the first part, but you said, trust no one. What was that quote that you said?
Yeah, so trust nobody and verify everyone. So
Okay,
in zero
trust nobody and
trust,
verify
we
everybody.
assume that you cannot trust anyone. Yes, everyone.
I agree. I mean, especially in the world that we live in today, online, it could be a scary place of making sure you're verifying everything. We are at the time. I once again want to thank you so much. Let me ask you this: where can people connect with you offline? Where are you?
Yeah, I can be reached on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I'm looking forward to connecting with everyone. I'm very active on all social media, so if you type in my name, Ingrid Vasiliu-Feltes, there's no one else on LinkedIn with that name. So looking forward to.
Absolutely. And let me ask you one last question before I let you go. What is one prediction that you have in 2023 for healthcare 4.0?
I think we'll see definitely increased push towards smart hospitals and smart cities, health cities, because I think that's the only way we can actually solve some of the pain points we've identified.
That's really interesting. I definitely, I'm excited to see what's going to happen in the World Cup. I think, they're going to be pushing the boundaries in innovation, especially in healthcare. So I'm excited to see, what transpires from that. So thank you again so much for joining us today. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. What's up, everybody? I am joined by Michelle here next, and I'll introduce her here in a second. Hi, Michelle. How's it going?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So, Michelle, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So Michelle Perugini, is that how you pronounce the last name?
Perugini, close.
Perugini. Okay, I apologize for that. She's the CEO and the founder of Presagan. Am I saying that correct? Presagan. Sorry. So, Michelle, you will be talking today about responsible commercialization of deep tech in healthcare is premised on trust. So I think, that's a really interesting topic. I will let you introduce yourself and kind of take over the floor, and I'll step back and come back in at the end to field some questions if we have any.
Great. Thanks so much. Now is my screen showing? Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining the session today. It's a really interesting topic that I'm going to be talking about, which is responsible introduction of innovation into the clinical setting. And I want to premise my talk on a real life example of a fertility application and some of the issues that are kind of persistent across the areas of introducing innovation into the clinical setting, and how trust plays a huge role into that introduction. So my name is Michelle Perugini. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Presagan. We're an AI healthcare company in women's health, and we have a really advanced AI platform that connects clinics, patients, and medical data from around the world to drive AI-enhanced healthcare. Really exciting time for AI in the healthcare sector, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing, but the example that I'll describe today that's actually in clinical use at the moment is our Life Whisperer products, which are around AI-enhanced fertility, really using artificial intelligence to be able to drive better outcomes for IVF patients around the world. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're doing first, and then I can go into some of the aspects of trust and some of the challenges that I see with respect to introducing clinical innovation into clinical use and into clinical workflows, and how we overcome some of those barriers for new technology. So Life Whisperer is a really interesting application of artificial intelligence. It's around utilising images of a patient's embryos as they go through the IVF process to be able to help doctors to decide which of those embryos are most likely to lead to a pregnancy, which embryos are the highest quality, and which embryos should they transfer to the patient first. It is interesting technology because it's taking just a single image of an embryo after fertilization to be able to utilize advanced artificial intelligence that has been trained on tens of thousands of historical cases of embryos that have been transferred and for which we know the pregnancy outcomes. And so the AI has essentially learnt the features of those embryos that relate to the quality of the embryo and therefore the likelihood that that embryo will achieve a pregnancy. And we've also got a second application that takes that same image of the embryo and helps to determine the likelihood that that embryo is genetically normal just from a single image of the embryo, which is quite amazing. And then, of course, the doctors use that to be able to inform their decisions about which embryo to transfer for the patient. It's completely objective and accurate, quite accurate. It's easy to use, simple drag and drop of images onto the system. Very cost effective, both for patients and also the clinics. And it's non-invasive. So we're talking about technology here that is, improving the clinical decisioning within the IVF lab without any actual physical intervention to the embryo itself and causing no harm there. So AI in healthcare is a really interesting industry, and there's so many different kind of market sizing values around at the moment about how big the actual market is for AI in healthcare. But one of the staggering statistics that I've seen is around the health economic returns that can be generated and achieved through artificial intelligence. It's about 5-fold of the market size. And so what's interesting about this is that AI has so much value to add from the perspective of not only clinical decision support, but also creating efficiency gains within the clinical environment, improving patient outcomes, being able to drive some of the core improvements that we see in what is quite a conservative and traditional industry. It's exciting the ways that AI is being used already in the clinical environment for clinical decision support tools like the one that I'll talk about today. Therapeutics, being able to shorten the time for therapeutics to get to market and go through those testing processes through doing in silico drug development and drug design is really exciting. Personalized medicine, being able to identify really specific genetic traits that relate to a particular individual and being able to personalize that down to the individual using AI technology. Patient engagement, just really simple workflow operational improvements around text analysis of clinical notes and digitizing some of those core, administrative tasks within the clinical environment. And so it's actually a really exciting industry to be operating in, and there's a huge amount of gains to be had, but there's certainly challenges in terms of implementation of many of these types of innovations. And although I'll be talking about artificial intelligence today, a lot of what I'm talking about is really relevant to any new innovation within a clinical setting. So what's holding back AI in healthcare? It's really interesting area. So AI products often don't scale, and they don't scale effectively because they require very large, diverse data sets in order to be effective. And in order to represent the right level and generality around the clinical environment and patient demographics. And if the AI is not built on the right data, it can be incredibly biased, it can be brittle, it can be unreliable, and there's many famous cases of where this has happened. Healthcare is also really heavily regulated, and this creates huge barriers for innovation, particularly new innovation where the existing regulatory frameworks don't really understand or, they're not synonymous with the new ways of testing these types of innovations and technologies. And so if you boil all of this down, it really comes down to a general lack of trust and a general lack of understanding of new technology and how to test it. And I want to unpack that a little bit today. So this is a really fun little infographic here, but what it serves to tell you is that the medical customer is incredibly scientific. They're conservative. At the end of the day, they're treating patients and lives are at risk. And so any innovation might be wonderful from the perspective of, you know, how it can potentially shorten, in our case, shorten the time to pregnancy for patients. That's a huge benefit. But on the other hand, there's just so much that needs to be unpacked in terms of that trust. And it's not just trust, it's about time. A lot of these clinicians are making extremely critical decisions in a time-poor environment. They've got a lot of information that's available to them. They need to know what they need to integrate within their clinical workflow. They can't be adding things that add time to their kind of consults or decisioning. It really needs to be cognizant of so many different things in terms of the clinical integration. So what they really want to know is there a specific driver for change? It's kind of that don't fix what ain't broke analogy. And what is it and how does it work? Is it easy enough for them to explain? Do they understand it well enough to be able to talk to the patients about it? Is it adding value to their clinic patient relationship and discussions? Is the technology reliable is a big one. How can they have trust and accept that technology is actually adding value to their clinical decisions to the extent that they'll be willing to introduce it into their clinical workflow and clinical practice? Now, of course, that's a little bit more relevant to clinical decision support type tools that I'll be talking about today. Things that are clinical efficiency gains are a little bit less subject to that type of, adoption barrier. But I guess at the end of the day, it's kind of, what are the benefits? Are they real? Can I explain them? Do I trust the technology? Does it work? And, are there too many solutions that I'm trying to integrate? And can I actually work effectively with all of these solutions? So the way that I like to view the world in terms of innovation and clinical adoption of innovation is really about aligning incentives. How can we align incentives across the clinicians and embryologists, the patients themselves, and the technology that kind of sits in the middle there and supports both of those sides? And it's actually more difficult than you might think it is. They've all got very different incentives. So from the clinicians' point of view, and in this case, it's embryologists that I'll be talking about in terms of clinical integration of AI into the fertility sector. But clinicians have an ultimate duty to their patients. They want to achieve better patient outcomes, but they need to do it in a really constrained environment where there's time efficiency issues. They want to be putting in place things that provide operational improvements whilst creating those improved patient outcomes. For patients, there's other incentives driving them. Obviously, they want better outcomes as well, and that's where they're aligned. But they need to have access, and the technologies need to be affordable, particularly if you want to deliver innovations that are scalable and that encompass a broad range of different patient demographics. They're also interested more and more in treatment transparency. So how is this doctor actually serving me as a patient? And can I get a window into the technologies or the approaches that are being used or the tests that are being used to be able to improve my own treatment, and patients becoming more and more discerning? And then, of course, the AI technology in this case sits in the middle. It's really, it can certainly bridge the gap between these incentives, and it can support things like clinical decision-making. It can support that operational efficiency if it's used in the right way. It can increase standardization of care, and it can certainly help improve accuracy of those clinical decisions, which is really exciting. So all of the incentives there are aligned, but it's just really important to map out how technology is bridging that gap between the clinicians and the patients. So then, of course, we talk about responsible introduction of innovation and how that's premised on trust. And I think trust really underpins everything in terms of introduction of innovation, particularly into a clinical environment. But if you think about other industries, I mean, financial services is the same, heavily regulated industry. There's major trust issues there around the data and technology as well. So this is not reserved to healthcare per se, but I think it's more pronounced in the healthcare sector. So trust kind of cuts across many different areas. Data and technology, I talked a little bit about this already. How does it work, and can I explain it? Do I understand enough about the technology to be able to both trust it but also explain it if I need to explain the results in a consult to a patient? Do I trust that I can do that? Scientific and clinical validation, I mean, this is a bit of a no-brainer. This is, does the technology work, and has it been adequately tested? And there's many different ways in which new technologies and innovations get tested that are not necessarily the traditional ways that therapeutics, for example, go through the testing process. And so this can be a bit of a barrier and can cause some, mistrust issues in terms of the technology validation. Regulatory quality and data management. So this is a big one. Doesn't meet the legal requirements to be marketed. And that seems easy, but when you're talking about scalable innovations that cut across many different global locations and different markets, as well as data privacy issues, you've got quality and regulatory issues and regulatory requirements that need to be met in order to bring some of these innovations into the clinical environment. Even if they're low-risk devices, often they do require those regulatory and quality standards to be met before they can be marketed. Clinical utility. So this is a big one, and it's not so much a trust issue, but it is underpinned by trust. So does this actually solve a clinical need, and is it practical for me? I now trust that it's been built on the right data and technology. It's been validated. It's gone through all of the checks and balances, but does it actually solve my need in a way that I need it to be solving? And then, of course, the patient benefit. Will it increase access and improve outcomes for the patients? And again, that comes heavily down to the clinical validation. And do I believe that this is going to be helpful to my patients? And cost and value. So the health economics here is really important. Does the value outweigh the cost to the patient or provider? And so when you're talking about innovations like artificial intelligence, often there's, a scale advantage where you can create these technologies that can be delivered at a relatively low cost, and it can be a huge advantage in terms of the patient outcomes that can be achieved versus the cost and to provide that service to the patient, which is really exciting. So I just want to unpack those different areas a little bit. Trust in data. This is really important. There's so many different aspects where data is very important in terms of underpinning the trust of the AI, in this case, that's being developed. There's data bias issues if the right data has not been used, if the data is not diverse enough, if it doesn't represent different clinical environments and different patient demographics, then that AI is not going to work at different clinical environments when you put it out to market, and it can be incredibly biased and subject to the data that it's been trained on. Data diversity, again, it needs to be trained on that broad data set that's representative of those different examples that it's going to see actually in the real world. Data access, this is a huge one in healthcare. So data privacy laws prevent you being able to move data between different country borders or across country borders. So it's very difficult to bring data into the one spot, into a centralized location, to be able to do anything like build an AI or train an AI. And so, as a company, we've focused a lot on these core issues around data access. How do we access those diverse data sets? How do we do that in a privacy secure way so that we're not breaching those data privacy laws, but we still get the benefit of being able to train our AI on really globally diverse data sets? So that's a very interesting area that we've spent a lot of time working in. And data quality is another one. Poor quality data can contribute to really poor performing AI models, and you need to be able to manage those data quality issues. I like this one. Explainable AI. A lot of people, a lot of companies, there's a lot of talk about explainable AI. It's a difficult, it's a difficult topic to broach. The AI by nature is a massive, complex network of connections. And it's never going to be able to tell you exactly how it made the decision that it made. And that's kind of the nature and the benefit of deep learning, is that it can do that. And so we've got to be really careful when we talk about explainable AI. Of course, we're able to identify areas of an image, for example, that AI is focusing on, but we may never be able to explain exactly why it focused on that area and what the core, underpinning biological reason for that is. And so we've got to be a little bit careful about the narrative about AI and shift that narrative from how does it work to does it actually work? And does it work for my clinic and for my patients? And we need to be building these technologies responsibly so that they're based on the right type of data, so that we can test them rigorously, so that we can prove that they work. And that's very important. But explaining every intricacy around how that neural network is coming up with that decision is quite challenging. So again, it's about changing that narrative. Does it work? How does it work to does it work? And how do I explain those results? And that's where clinical validation is really important. So if we look at scientific validation, there's many ways that we can do that. There's scientific validation around publishing studies and white papers, that are peer-reviewed in well-respected journals. Clinical validation for AI technology often involves many different types of trial designs, retrospective, prospective, RCT type trial designs as well, and ensuring that you've really got the right type of blind and double-blind testing that's been taken place, so that you can ensure that that AI innovation that's been developed actually works in the real world, in real-world clinical environments. And then, of course, continuously monitoring that the use of that particular technology in real-world clinical use is the most important scientific and clinical validation that we can do. This is an interesting one. So this is, does it work for me? Is it suitable for my clinical environment? Does it work for me? There's often this case where, you've tested your innovation extensively across many different clinical environments. You've published the papers, you've run the clinical validations, you've gone through regulatory approvals, but does the technology actually work in my clinical environment? And clinics will often want to trial and test innovations, and that's completely reasonable, and they should do that because each clinical environment is quite nuanced, and they need to have an opportunity to be able to trial and test it and see that it works with them, not only from a validation perspective, but also from a clinical integration and workflow perspective. That's really important. And they need to be guided on how to do that, because a lot of these innovations are not native to them. They're very used to the traditional clinical workflows that they've been in. They don't have a lot of time. And so one of the methods that we've used is really guiding clinics through that clinical validation process, so that they can understand how to best test and measure that new innovation and understand that it's working in the way that it's intended to. So how can I then explain the results? And I think, this is a little undersold, but if you're bridging that gap between clinician and patient, and you're providing technology that is directly visible to the patient, you as a clinician have a really tough job of explaining that innovation to a patient, helping them to understand what the results mean. Why have they used it? What if the clinician disagrees with the results of the AI, and what happens in those different circumstances? And there's different ways of doing that. I mean, for us, we've created really simple patient reports that explain what the results mean, that explain, that kind of can bring together the different decision points that the clinicians use, not only the AI, but also their traditional metrics that they've used to make a particular clinical decision. And that's been really effective for us. But I think it's really important not to ignore this, because those clinicians, if they don't understand it, if they don't know how to explain it, they will not use that technology for their patient, or they'll not explain the technology adequately to the patient, and that can lead to a whole range of other challenges. And then, of course, there's the more boring aspects of trust around regulatory and quality management. Medical device regulations really difficult. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer about technologies and innovations like artificial intelligence, that they don't need this same medical device regulation, but many of them do. Our device, Life Whisper, in the fertility sector is a medical device, is regulated in a different way in every country in the world, anywhere from unregulated through to Class 2 regulation. And there's so many different regulatory bodies to deal with. There's, the FDA, CE marking, a whole range of others. But then there's also the compliance standards around data like HIPAA and GDPR and many more. And there's some new AI standards that are coming out as well, such as the NICE framework, that are helping to set expectations around the evidence base for new innovations like AI. So it is quite a complex regulatory and quality environment in which to operate and develop these types of innovations. So, but I guess all of this is really adding to the trust element for those innovations. And it's really helpful to be meeting those standards and that level of regulatory scrutiny, because that's something that the clinical, clinicians and physicians really understand, and they respect that regulatory burden. Trust through collaboration. So this is an interesting one. When you're talking about AI technology and new innovations, what we found really helpful is collaborating with many clinics around the world and getting them involved in the actual build process, or the process of developing these AI technologies that we're bringing out to market. And collaboration's really been the key for us, not only in being able to access core data sets that we need to build the AI, but also, again, developing that trust from those organizations and clinics that are collaborating with us, because they get a window into the development process of the AI. And that's really important, because then the more they understand, the better they, the more they trust the technologies that we're developing together. They're using their own data sets. We're testing in their own clinical environments. They get to see how well the technology works. They get to be part of that scientific exploration. They get to be part of the clinical validation. And it's really important for both sides of developing that level of understanding. And cost versus value. So cost versus value is really important. The health economics equation of any technology is incredibly important to understand how much value is the technology adding versus how much cost will it add to the either clinical environment or the patient directly. So there's a lot of factors that weigh into this equation around, for the clinic, should they buy it or should they build it themselves? And, often that cost equation is really important in their decisioning about, whether they work with third-party providers of these types of innovations, whether they try and internally build them themselves. But one of the benefits of having kind of, this scalable AI solutions is that the more scalable they are, the more relevant they are to different clinical environments and different patient demographics, the lower the cost of that implementation. And so, you can offer these products at really low cost to the patient at scale, which makes it really beneficial. So I'm just going to summarize here around responsible introduction of innovation. It really is all about trust. Aligning incentives and creating trust is incredibly important for the success of any innovation, particularly in a clinical environment. Providing a scientific and clinical evidence base and validation of that innovation, whatever it may be. Every innovation will be tested in different ways, but that's incredibly important to underpin that trust equation. Balancing how it works, or how does it work, with showing that it actually does work is really important as well. We're not trying to necessarily, there is an education element here, but we're not necessarily trying to educate them on the intricate workings of how that innovation operates. But what we're trying to do is validate that the technology does actually work. And educating clinics and patients on new technology is really important, taking the time to help them to understand at least what the results mean. How do they explain those results to patients is really important. And then mitigating key risks around data security, regulation, quality management, and ensuring that the cost finally is balanced with the value that's provided is really important. So thank you so much. I hope that's been useful, and I'm happy to open up to some questions.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for that. That was an amazing talk. I'm very fascinated by AI. And I think, as a marketer myself, it's definitely, I've seen a big shift in what AI is doing. One thing that you mentioned that I really, really stood out to me was about how AI is there to make things more efficient. And I think, in my opinion, I don't know very much about it, but I think it's like definitely helping us reduce that human error aspect of it, right? Especially in healthcare where it could be life or death.
Correct. Yeah, it's human error is a huge issue, but I think sometimes you just need multiple lines of evidence when you're making a decision. So having more information is sometimes kind of overloads clinicians, but if that information is presented in the right way, it can provide a second opinion or a second line of evidence that kind of validates their own clinical views. So I see them working very synonymously. I don't see AI being the decision maker or the diagnostic necessarily. I see it being a support tool for clinicians to be able to leverage to make those better decisions.
I see. So, your company is how long have y'all been operating for? I mean, are y'all a newer startup? Because, I've only heard of like maybe one other company that might be working in this field. So it's really interesting, and I applaud you. I think it's amazing work, and any way that I can be of any resource to you or your team, I'd love to. But how long have y'all been around for?
Yeah, so we've been around for nearly 5 years now.
Okay, amazing. So we'll see. Let me look in the comments to see if we have any questions from the audience. If you have any questions for Dr. Michelle, please feel free to drop them in the comments. While we wait, let me ask you this one question. From an AI perspective, what is a prediction that you have for 2023? And how it's going to play a role, big picture?
Yeah, I think it's not a quick moving field. I think it's quite a challenging industry. So I don't think anything's going to happen necessarily in the short term, but I think what we are seeing is more of these technologies actually reaching the clinic, which is very exciting. But there's still all of those challenges that I mentioned and barriers to uptake. That are really important to consider. And so unfortunately, a lot of AI technology that's developed in these research organizations really never sees the light of day. They're very interesting applications, interesting algorithms that have the potential to do really great things in the clinical environment, but they're just not ready for prime time. And so that's been the challenge with AI in the healthcare space. There are huge barriers to entry, massive regulatory burden, and it's the AI needs to be built right and tested right before it can be actually utilized. So, yeah, I think we're going to see an increasing level of these or amount of these solutions reaching the market. And I think platforms or technologies like ours that can really access those diverse data sets in a privacy secure way, in a decentralized federated way is a really good start, because it means that we're building the technologies right for scale from day one.
So, you brought up an interesting point. Because in healthcare, obviously with HIPAA and everything, how does that play a role with AI? I mean, is there an extra level of security, I guess, or just verification that needs to be done because of the AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about collecting large data sets of, potentially private patient information, we're under the same scrutiny that everyone else is with regards to collecting and storing that information. I think one of the challenges is, if you're looking in a hospital environment, you can put those checks and balances in place. with from a data security perspective pretty easily. But when you're talking about accessing global data sets to build that AI, you need to think about things like informed patient consent. You need to think about where am I storing all this data and how am I accessing it? Am I moving that data? You can't move healthcare data across country borders without breaching data privacy laws. So then how do you access the diverse data that you need to build these things? It's really difficult. And so we've spent a lot of time as a company building the infrastructure or the pipeworks to be able to access that data. And we never move or see patient data. So our AI technology around federated AI training allows us to send our AI out to each of those individual siloed data sets and take the learnings from the data without ever moving the data. And so that's how we've overcome some of those data privacy challenges. But yeah, it is really challenging for the AI space.
Yeah, I didn't even think about like what it was like going across borders, because every country's different, I mean, I'm assuming some are more strict than others. So, and for the audience and even for me, if you don't mind, so our next speaker, we actually are going to be delayed a little bit. So we have a little bit more time, so we don't have to stop right at the 35 mark. So with AI, something, when all this data is being inputted into y'all's AI, like what is that process of taking the input in order to provide some sort of output? Like what is like the in between? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'm trying to figure out, so it's just like how, because from my understanding, you take all this data in and it looks at it and, makes assumptions, based on historical data, right?
Yeah. So there's different ways of building AI. It depends on the purpose. What are you trying to build? So if you look at our embryo quality assessment example with Life Whisperer, essentially we took a whole global data set of embryo images at a particular time point from patients actually undergoing the IVF treatment. And then we got the outcomes. So the pregnancy outcomes. Did the patient get pregnant from that particular embryo? So we've got matched outcome data to the embryo data. And then we built the AI based on those images of tens of thousands of historical embryos where we knew what the outcome is. And essentially that AI then learns the features of those embryos that look more like a good embryo that resulted in a pregnancy versus those features that look more like an embryo that did not result in a pregnancy. And it learns those features. And so when it sees a new embryo image, is very accurately able to tell whether it looks more like one that achieved a pregnancy or not. Same with the genetics product. But instead of pregnancy outcome, we use genetic testing outcomes. So in IVF, you can genetically test embryos. And so we had the actual ground truth outcome for whether those embryos were genetically normal or not. And again, the AI then is trained to look at the images and determine which features relate to an embryo that looks more like one that's genetically normal or not. And so that's essentially how we build that AI.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So I was just informed that we actually do have to stop at the 35-minute mark. But so where can people connect with you offline, and where can they learn more about if they want to learn more about your company and kind of some of the services?
Yeah, of course. So the website's prestigen.com. You can obviously find me on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. I'm very accessible, and you can email me at michelle@prestigen.com.
Amazing. Well, I definitely will connect with you. I think I might have already, but thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure having you. I hope you have a great day.
Of course. Thanks so much.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. What's up, everybody? Back. Thank you for sticking around. So we have a change of speakers. Mr. Blair Butterfield will be up next. He is the chairman of Wind River Advisory Group, LLC. He will be speaking over the topic of macro trends in health IT, past and present. So while we wait for him to join us, how's everyone enjoying the summit so far? Hi, Blair.
Hey, Javy, can you hear me?
I can. How's it going today?
It's going great. Good to
Thank
be
you so
here.
much for joining us and being flexible with your schedule.
Sure, no problem. I know how these things work, so.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I will give you the floor. I'm not sure if it's up to you how you want to structure your talk, but if you want to leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for any Q&A, I'll let you take over the floor. Thanks again for joining us.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how long this talk takes. It may not take the full amount of time, so we should have time for questions.
Amazing.
I'll try and share my screen a bit here. I live in Wyoming, as you can probably see from the background image here. That's actually a real picture that I took this summer. So let me try this and see. Let's see. How can I share? Let's see.
Where in Wyoming are you located?
I'm in a town called DuBois, which is just about an hour from Jackson Hole, which everybody pretty much has heard of. So how can I share this? Let's see. If I go to slideshow.
There should be a button in the middle of your screen with the little arrow pointing up. Do you see that?
Yep. Okay, so I just want to share a window. It's not actually showing.
It will should pop up here in a second.
Oh, I have to update my permissions. I'm sorry, to allow this browser to do that. So let me just check that here. Sorry, I'm just.
No worries. While we wait, I'll give a few of the points that you will be talking about just to take up some of this time. So Blair started with best of breed digital solutions in the 1980s and 90s, expanding scope of solutions in the following enterprise-wide system. So scale up from enterprise to national solutions, HIE. Not sure what that stands for, but maybe that's something you can share with us later. And the addition of technologies, AI, mobile, cloud. So what's next? I'm excited to ask you my last question. I've been asking all the speakers about 2023 predictions. So if you are ready, we'll let you take over.
Okay, let me try this again without the, just share the full screen. Let's see what that will do. Nope. Yeah.
What browser are you on, Blair?
I'm on Chrome, so
okay.
I just need to change the permissions. I don't use Chrome very often, so that's why I'm a little clumsy with it. Let's see, which it's probably a system setting.
So is there, is there a little camera on your search bar?
Let me just get there. Yes.
I'm not sure if you can click on that, and it should be able to allow permissions.
Okay.
Now you're going to have to go on in the back end of your settings. Not sure what kind of computer you're using.
Yeah, this is an Apple, late generation Apple iMac. So let me see here, video. Yeah. Well, what I could do is I could talk you through the talk. If I can't show it, maybe we'll just start with that just to save time. The graphics are really not important to the talk. As long as you can hear me, I think the content will come through, and we can go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that so we don't take up more of your time trying to figure this out, So thank you again for joining us, Blair. I'll let you take over the floor from now, and I'll check back in 5 or 10 minutes, or if you're done before that.
Okay, sounds good. Great. So the talk will be on macro trends in health IT. This is because I've been in this industry for about 3+ decades now. And so I'm going to try and give you the forest view rather than the tree view of what's been going on in the industry. I'm now in private consulting. I retired from a full-time position about 5-6 years ago, and I work both privately, independently, and I also work closely with a global consulting firm called LEK, which is based out of New York City. So let me just get the slides here. So my most recent role, I was a board member at Spoke, which is a NASDAQ-traded health IT company. I was there on their board for 9 years. Before that, my full-time position was as president of what is now a division of Philips Healthcare. It's called Vital Health, and we developed a EMR platform as a service, and we also had applications built on that platform for chronic disease management and routine outcome reporting and patient-reported outcomes. Before that, I was at GE, General Electric, was a vice president in their eHealth division. I was there for about 9 years and worked initially in their imaging division and then moved into the eHealth division, where I oversaw a lot of international projects during the time of national eHealth initiatives beginning all around the world. So I'll have a little more insight into that later. Prior to that, I was with a leading imaging company called Vital Images, now owned by Canon. And that company was probably the first to introduce three-dimensional medical imaging technology to be an adjunct to PACS systems. So there are 4 major health challenges that we're seeing globally, and especially here in the US. I can call them diseases of healthcare. One is rising costs with aging populations and chronic disease. Another is inefficiencies in the healthcare system, difficulties in scheduling and payment, way too many faxes, still too much paper. Despite all of the progress, it's not as electronic as we would like it to be. It's not as instantaneous as it should be. Another disease of the healthcare system is lack of access. Way too few doctors, particularly now with the pandemic. A lot of people have left the profession in order to avoid burnout. And especially this is true in rural areas where technology has been stepping in to help and bridge that gap by exporting expertise through telehealth and so forth into rural areas. Another major issue or disease, we could say, is the quality of healthcare. Too many times patients are being treated with incomplete medical histories being provided to the caring provider, medication errors, and as we've heard from other speakers here today, just human error is an issue. So treatments that are being tried for this, one is digitization of health information, recording health information electronically, and then the next is sharing that information through a longitudinal electronic health record, allowing data to move between existing systems. Another treatment is disease management. The highest costs of healthcare in the system are chronic diseases, and with aging populations, this is becoming more prevalent. So there are attempts to right-site care with home health, patient-centric devices, etc., to lower the costs and keep patients out of the hospital and out of the physician office. And then finally, consumer empowerment. And this would include personal health records and other technologies that enable individual patients to take charge of their health and be proactive in managing it. So in terms of the systems that exist, I'll give a little bit of the history for those who may not have been around as long as I have. So the first systems that came out were really the ADT systems, which stands for Admission, Discharge, and Transfer. This was the master file of patient identity, contact information, and other very simple key data. And these systems replaced the paper files, which had been used for generations prior to that. Then after the ADT systems were in place, the next which really emerged for clinical solutions were hospital departmental systems, particularly in imaging or radiology and laboratory. And these started commercially in the 1970s and began to evolve much more rapidly in the 1980s and then the 90s. However, these were still standalone systems. They were islands of care, you could say, that were not networked. There were no networks in that era, so they could not share data. For example, the first imaging display systems, or picture archiving and communication systems, normally abbreviated as PACS, those were tethered directly to the MRI and CT systems, and they could only display the images they were collecting on that system. They couldn't send them anywhere. They couldn't import them from anywhere. And then after that, other departments, such as the blood bank, cardiology, etc., began to digitize and also adopt their own version of standalone systems in their departments. Then the next thing that happened was consolidation and then competition. As networks became more developed and the desire to share information grew, tension began to arise between what we would call these best of breed systems, which are these individual departmental systems that were standalone, and these early generation enterprise systems, which were enterprise systems, as the name implies, were designed to serve multiple departments and not just one. The trade-off that was faced in the era was best of breed systems. These individual standalone systems were highly optimized for the specific needs and workflows of the department for which they were developed, while the enterprise systems had the advantage of having a common single database architecture and a common look and feel user interface, and they could therefore also share data between their modules and across departments. So in this era, hospitals landed on one side or the other of that fence, either best of breed or enterprise, depending on who was calling the shots in the procurement cycle, whether it was the chief financial officer, the department chair, chief medical officer, or the CIO. However, as you might expect, eventually enterprise systems won out. This is very similar to what we saw in personal computing with Microsoft Office, which replaced a lot of individual applications that many of us used in the early years of computers. So the single suite of tools that had a common look and feel and a single database was eventually the choice. The next thing that happened was in the early 2000s, starting in around 2004, government decided to incentivize and help motivate the creation of electronic health records for all citizens. This was a huge goal, and even today, after more than 20 years, it has still not been realized, although there has been a significant amount of progress. In this early period of this, and up till about maybe 10 years ago, financial incentives were promoted by the government to enable providers, hospitals, and physician offices to adopt electronic medical record systems known as EMRs. And these incentives came under the term meaningful use, which was something that came out of Congress. The idea was you didn't just have to buy the system using the government's subsidized procurement method, but you also had to use it in a meaningful way, meaning you had to actually use it in a way that moved the needle on the quality of healthcare. And there was also a need to be able to share information with other providers and with the patients. The goal of meaningful use was a laudable one, was to enable sharing of this information in order to reduce the cost and improve quality of care by minimizing repetitive testing. Very often when a patient would go to a new doctor, even if they'd already had a suite of tests performed, because the results were not available readily, the patient would be asked to repeat the test. And of course, that introduced cost as well as inconvenience. Often also there was lack of access to the medication history of the patient. So the new provider may not even know what medications the patient was taking or had taken in the past, and also prior diagnoses. So these essential pieces of information were part of the goal of meaningful use, to be able to share this electronically from provider to provider through the internet. So data sharing really became the next focus. And it actually became a global phenomenon. I was fortunate to be working globally at this time, and governments around the world were actually investing in these longitudinal, comprehensive electronic health records, or EHRs, which would pull together a patient's health information from multiple independent providers that they had been seeing. So adoption of EMRs, and as distinct from EHR, EMR was determined to be the term that we use for the system that an individual provider's office or hospital would acquire. And an EHR, or electronic health record, was a more comprehensive set of data for a patient. So EMR is the system that the doctor uses. EHR would be the comprehensive record for a patient. So EMRs alone would not create the EHR. There was a need to be able to share this information, as I mentioned. However, during this era, the standards for sharing were immature and unreliable. So even though many providers had acquired these EMRs, they were unable to actually share the data that they were required to share. So an enormous amount of effort and expense was put into trying to rapidly mature these standards and test them based on the key workflows that meaningful use mandates required. So there was a significant collaborative effort established between standards organizations in the US and globally. And also there was oversight established from policy leaders to be able to direct those efforts and ensure that they would achieve the goals that meaningful use had set. So the thing about standards is they're boring, but they're essential. They are important because they enable predictability, meaning measurement, repeatability, reproducibility. They enable specialization. They enable more vendors to plug and play into the comprehensive EHR solution. They also prevent lock-in, so that a vendor who has a patient's data stored in their system can actually share that and not just have it locked up where it can't be accessed by other providers and other systems. And finally, they reduce costs, because when you have standards, then you can have a repeatable installation process that's not custom for each individual installation. And that was significant. So around the same time, in order to establish these EHRs, again, the comprehensive electronic health record that networked together all of these different systems across a region or across a country, many countries in the world began to establish what they called national e-health initiatives, which would network and share this data regionally or across the country, depending on the size. A lot of funding was invested in this, billions of dollars. And again, the key goal was to enable better care for patients at a lower cost. These national e-health projects were actually laboratories in a sense. They were all testing different versions of different standards for data sharing. They were employing different architectures for establishing these regional networks. And they also had struggles with different governance approaches, how to oversee these projects and ensure that they were managed properly and achieved the proper goals. There was sort of a division that established at that time between what we would call public and private networks. The public ones were funded heavily by the government, and they might, in the US, they were typically for an entire state or a county or several counties of a state. And they were nonprofits. They were independent of any established healthcare provider, such as a hospital network. Some of these did succeed. A lot of collaboration, a lot of diplomacy was needed to encourage hospitals to actually share their data and be able to import and export it through these centralized network hubs. These were called HIEs, or Health Information Exchanges. And the ones that in the end seem to have survived, although a few of the public ones are still around, some of the ones that actually gained more traction in the early years were the private networks, because these were established based on a demonstrated need by hospital organizations in a particular region who referred patients to each other or who received referrals from common sources. And they had funding, they had motivation, they had an established collaboration already in place at the senior level of the organizations. And so they were able to get these up and running. And a number of them, as I said, have succeeded. They started early with simple information like medication histories, lab results, and then as the standards matured, they were able to actually export more comprehensive clinical documents out of their electronic medical records and share those as well. So what happened next was meaningful use expanded. The government decided that it was time to connect additional healthcare stakeholders into the system. And so this began to address the needs of unaddressed areas of healthcare, such as behavioral health or mental health, long-term care, pharmacies, etc., which had been left out of the early incentives and didn't have access to these HIEs or health information exchanges. So they were now included. They were now offered incentives, financial incentives to participate, and the richness of the data available through those networks grew significantly. At the same time, the vendors of the electronic medical records were being besieged with requests for connectivity because of these networks being established within the hospitals and also between hospitals. They were being asked, how can we plug into the electronic medical record and put data in there or take data out of it? So a big focus was on application programming interfaces, or APIs, and app farms, which were developed to enable other vendors to be able to participate and connect into the EMR. So the point to be made here is that the electronic medical record is today the core of the health IT system in almost any healthcare provider organization. It is the largest investment that they've made. It is almost always a 7-figure plus investment, sometimes more than that, sometimes 8 figures. So it is actually quite a significant thing, and they want to optimize that. So again, in parallel with this, standards which would enable these connections through the APIs, the app farms, and others were developed. And the most recent set of standards which we're seeing in the marketplace now is from an organization called HL7, Health Level 7. It's been around for decades. Interfacing in the past was always done using their version 2. They had kind of a false start with version 3, which never really took off. And now they have something called FHIR, F-H-I-R. I believe that stands for Fast Healthcare Interfacing Resource. And those standards have really taken off, and they are now being adopted and promoted aggressively into the commercial marketplace. So as far as enabling healthcare transformation, really, as I mentioned, the electronic medical record is still the core and foundation of the digitization of healthcare in healthcare provider organizations. And it's evolving from, there's stages of it. There's really 5 stages we can identify of sophistication. So the EMR vendors themselves have invested heavily over the years in advancing the capabilities and of their system. And I'll talk in a minute about the technologies that are being added. But the big picture is that they started off as simple dumb databases that collected information. Then they went into automated documentation of interactions with patients and with labs, etc. Then the next generation has clinical decision support, which is an AI type of a solution which would enable the EMR to become a helper, sort of a helper that would give reminders to the clinician. If a patient has this diagnosis or this symptom, maybe this test is indicated, or maybe this diagnosis is indicated. Then the next level would be the EMR becomes a colleague where it actually can support the workflow as an equal partner with the physician. And then the holy grail, which has not been achieved, is what you would call guided care, where the EMR actually would become a mentor and actually oversee the whole process and ensure the standard of care is being met. This, of course, does introduce some ethical and legal issues. I wrote a column on this a number of years ago about the legal liability that EMR vendors could eventually be subject to if the physician relies on it in lieu of their own training. Because as we know, when doctors leave medical school, medical knowledge is doubling every 8 years and maybe even more rapidly these days. But it comes to a point where the computer may actually have more up-to-date and more complete information than the physician themselves. And so who's responsible if the physician relies on the computer's updated information to make a diagnosis and recommend a treatment plan? This introduces issues that have to be addressed. So the standard today is that if there is a physician between the computer and the patient, the physician bears ultimate responsibility and decision making for that treatment plan. So, there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of things that are going to develop over the coming years. And what we're seeing now is additional technologies emerging, which are supporting the whole workflow and in-hospital and intra-hospital and intra-physician office and ambulatory surgical centers. All of these different sites of care are being connected, and more types of communication technologies are being used. And all of these are intended to, again, increase the quality of care at lower cost. And these are things like other speakers have talked about: AI, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, or NLP, where the physician can simply speak and the computer understands and records everything. They can even parse those spoken comments into structured data, which can then be reported. There's obviously a heavy emphasis on mobile enablement of any health IT system. Most care providers it's not compatible with their workflows to sit in front of a computer screen and not interact directly with patients or be walking around the floors or from one floor to another. So they want everything to be also accessible on mobile devices. Another huge trend that we're seeing in healthcare, and it's moving rapidly, is the move to cloud, and especially cloud native applications, where particularly for smaller institutions that don't have large IT staffs or in-house data centers, they can just use software as a service through the cloud, and they can pay on a subscription basis rather than have to invest huge amounts of their precious capital into acquiring a system. There are trends such as platform as a service, which is where multiple applications can share the same common architecture and platform and grow as the needs of the organization grow. Of course, clinical decision support. And then one which I was recently involved with in my last board position, clinical communication and collaboration, which is a very exciting area which enables care teams to collaborate with each other in real time about the care of a patient with reference to the recorded clinical history of the patient in the EMR and also the EHR. The sort of payment and legal structures that support the introduction of these tools and of these enablement of these goals of saving money and delivering better care, you'll hear terms now such as value-based care. In the past, before all this digital healthcare technology was available, everything was fee for service, and there's still a lot of it around. Basically, whatever the doctor does, they get paid for based on the time and materials. Essentially, it's like when you bid on somebody as a contractor, they can either do a bid or time and materials. So in the past, doctors have always been sort of time and materials fee-based. Nowadays, value-based care, which is considering things like the outcome, did the patient get better? How much did it cost, et cetera? All of that factors into the compensation that provider organizations and their physicians received. And also the government has incentivized the establishment of what they call accountable care organizations, or ACOs. That's another alphabet soup here. But this is another attempt to get providers to pay attention to the cost and quality of care and get reimbursed accordingly. So technologies, applications, and the players in this marketplace are going to continue to evolve as they have been. Many of them will merge as shakeouts occur in the marketplace. We've seen, for example, in the EMR marketplace a few years ago, there were literally hundreds of EMR vendors that came on the scene with the availability of huge amounts of government money and meaningful use incentives. On the large end of the scale, it's really shaken out to only 3 or 4 vendors that pretty much own the marketplace. So the same thing continues. It has always continued. It happened in the imaging space, and it will happen more. But the goals do not change. And again, it's better care at lower cost. So with that, I will pause and come back to where I can see you and see if anybody has any questions.
Blair, thank you so much. That was great. And thank you for, I always appreciate when someone doesn't have to, be reading off a slide or just, I think there's just a different level, of expertise, when you're able just to kind of go off the cuff like that. So I appreciate that. So let's see. I'm looking to see if we have any questions from the audience so far. We do not yet. If you have any questions for Blair, please drop them in the comments. Blair, so while we wait for some questions to come in, let me ask you a few things. First off, where can people connect with you offline?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, and also on email. You can get me through my organization. Just email info@windriveradvisorygroup.com.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I will have the mods share that information. If not, people can just reach out to you on LinkedIn and get your information that way as well. It looks like we have a question from Andrew. Andrew asked, how many fast healthcare interoperability resources have you had?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not in the weeds of the actual standards world as much as I used to be. I know that it is a significant effort. I know that the Office of the National Coordinator of Health IT, which is a government-funded position of the federal government. It's part of the Department of Health, is very engaged in this as well. And it's HL7. So if you go to hl7.org, I believe is their website, you should be able to find out a lot about it there. But this is sort of the latest frontier of standards convergence and simplification, because frankly, it had gotten way too complex in the past. And the ability to, back in the day when I was involved with these actual systems going in, establishing interfaces between them was a double-edged sword. It was for the vendors. Number one, it made every installation custom and individual and different. And the comment you'd always hear is, if you've seen one HL7 interface, you've seen one HL7 interface, because each one was different. On the other hand, once it was established, the customer really didn't want to go through the effort and expense to replace it. And so as long as your system was working, they weren't going to replace you anytime soon, and you'd keep collecting the annual support contract, et cetera. So all of that's disappearing now with these new standards. It's much easier to replace a vendor, especially with cloud native systems in place. People can just turn off a subscription and turn on another one somewhere else. It's not quite that simple, but it is a lot simpler than it used to be. And that's good. I think it creates more competition. People have to deliver. They can't just get complacent and assume that it's too hard for the customer to change vendors, and therefore they're set. So that's progress in my view.
Thank you, Andrew, for that question. Thank you, Blair, for your answer. So let's see. Not any more questions. I have a few questions for you I like to personally ask. So first off, what are your predictions in 2023, or at least one prediction that you have based on, I guess anything that you have to do with and that you're working on? Like, what's the prediction that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence now, and that's sort of a big frontier that's being addressed. It's a huge subject. It's complicated. As some of your other speakers who are actually involved with companies that do AI are probably better qualified than me to talk about those fine details. But there's that. And then there's just continued need to harvest results from these huge investments in these EMRs. And with the sort of slowdown in the economy, I think what we're going to see is probably less innovative sort of blue sky technologies being launched and tested, and more of a sort of retrenching and saying, how can we squeeze more value out of the investment we've already made, making sort of smaller incremental adjustments and additions that will allow the goal, of cost saving to be achieved. So it's sort of a trade-off, invest a little to save a lot. That's going to be sort of the mantra, I think, that we're going to hear a lot from CIOs and others going forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because I agree. I think, part of, whether you're a new startup or, a startup that's been around for a few years, I think we do a really good job of like scaling quickly, but not really maximizing, like all the juice, for better lack of terms. So I think, companies, are going to need to get innovative about how they become more efficient in order to, kind of stay alive, especially with what we're seeing as, even though there's a lot of news about VCs and funding being kind of held back, there's still a lot of companies that are VCs and funds that are investing in startups. So I think, something that you mentioned earlier in your conversation, I thought was really interesting about healthcare, how a lot of these, online or telehealth or, just virtual health companies are moving to more of a value-based approach.
Mhm.
And kind of, for me, I run an accelerator program here in Dallas, and we always talk about like selling the benefits and not the features, and that's kind of where I see value based kind of playing a role. So I know of one company I've worked in the past out in Silicon Valley, and that's the first time I ever heard of that kind of terminology. So I thought it really fascinated by that. So I really appreciate you sharing all that insight. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So I don't know if you have any last parting words or any advice or, anything you'd like to say to the audience.
Just, health IT is an exciting area to be in with a career, and it has a very long and bright future. And certainly it did well for me, and I would encourage those of you that might be considering it. And you can also do good for people at the same time, of course, helping develop solutions to intractable healthcare problems. We all know that healthcare is one of the largest parts of the national budget. It sucks up a huge amount of money in this country that could otherwise be used. And if people could have better health and more productive lives, then that strengthens the overall economy. So health IT is kind of a fundamental enabler, as IT is in almost any industry, but healthcare has lagged behind because it is such a complex industry. There are so many barriers to entry, as was mentioned by other speakers. But those that are persisting and that have been in it a long time and understand the challenges and how to solve them, we just can't appreciate enough what's being done today. So anyway, thank you all for your attention and your time. It was a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing the rest of it.
Thank you, Blair. I hope you have a great day.
Thank
Stay
you.
warm. I know it's not that. It doesn't look that. It looks a lot warmer than it probably is.
Yes,
So
exactly. It's all white now. So thank you.
cool. Yep, absolutely. Have a great one. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Bye-bye.
What's up, everybody? That was Blair Butterfield. So we are going to take a break now, coffee break. So go get a cup of coffee, water, energy drink, whatever your drink of choice. We'll be back in about 20 minutes to restart, and we will be starting our first speaker, Glen Schuster. He is the president and CEO of VetaPoint. So he will be speaking over the operational use of data to succeed under value-based reimbursement. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in this morning, and take a break and feel free to join us for the second portion this afternoon. See you in 20 minutes. Thank y'all. Welcome back, guys, girls, ladies, and gentlemen. Javy here, your host. I am excited to introduce you our next speaker, Mr. Glen Schuster, President and CEO of VetaPoint. Glen, are you able to hear me and can you see me?
I can hear and see you.
Awesome. How's it going today?
Not too bad. We had snow yesterday, but it's a little warmer today, though still not a very pleasant day outside. You can probably see it behind
Where are
me.
you located?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Down in Texas, it's cold, but it's probably nothing compared to what y'all experience up there. So,
Yeah, well,
but thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm headed to Minnesota for Thanksgiving, so that's where
Ooh.
I'm from. So there you go. I'm doubling down on the cold.
Yeah, it seems like it just gets colder the further you go up north. So I hope you stay warm and safe travels. But thank you so much for joining us today.
No, appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely. So you are definitely talking about one of my favorite topics in data. I'm a very, being a very analytical person, I'm curious to kind of get some insight over, your topic of operational use data to succeed under value-based reimbursement. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'll let you introduce yourself and take the floor. And if you want to maybe leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, that would be awesome.
I will do so. Absolutely. You're able to see my screen. There we go.
I sure can. Yes.
Okay. We'll do this quickly. So just quick about me. I've been in health IT for about 25 years now. Done just about everything in the industry. I apologize that I have not fixed everything yet. Still have a ways to go. It is certainly, as the last speaker was saying, an area rich with opportunity for people looking for careers. Healthcare is basically just really starting what I would call a tech revolution, and that is to say the strategic use of technology as opposed to the commodity use of technology is just getting started, and it's and there's a lot of heavy legacy systems still sitting around that is really slowing down transformation. So we'll talk about some of that. Just quickly, what we do is, as a team, we focus on the data in healthcare. We've got a team of about 30 engineers. We've got clinical folks. We've got folks who specialize in healthcare data specifically, how it works, where it comes from, and how to use it. And we help our clients, which are mostly providers or payers in the healthcare space. We also work with a lot of startups and help them avoid some of the traditional stumbling blocks in healthcare technology. So this is kind of the team. I won't spend any time here, but you can kind of see we've got folks with a lot of experience. We share a fair amount of gray hair, or as my partner Eric, you can see, doesn't have any. But we're excited about what we do. We have a lot of passion. We believe that there's a lot of opportunity in this industry, and it's going to continue to change at a very rapid pace. So with that, kind of diving in. So I want to talk a little bit about why there is a drive to value-based reimbursement. It was mentioned at the previous speaker that about $1 in 5 dollars in our economy are spent in healthcare. It's over a $4 trillion industry. So why are we trying to do value-based reimbursement? How do those systems work? How are they set up? And then what do you do? And everybody in healthcare loves to talk about dashboards. One of the key things I want everyone to take away from this speech is dashboards are great. They're fantastic. You need them, but they're not enough. They tend to be looking backwards. They don't help you in the moment. And so we'll talk about that. So quickly, what's changing in the industry? Traditionally, the U.S. has been very commercial insurance focused. You get your employee insurance from your employer, but that is shrinking. That is as a percentage of the overall industry, and in real numbers, that is actually shrinking. Fewer employers are offering health insurance. There's more of these 1099 type jobs, contractor type jobs, Uber drivers, delivery, etc. And government programs are growing. both Medicaid and Medicare are growing. Actually, this chart shows that Medicaid has been holding even, but since the pandemic, it has actually grown quite a bit. And uninsured is slowly declining over the last several years. There's a lot of that with the Affordable Care Act that was passed in 2008. A lot of changes there. But one of the key things to focus on here is that the government is a very big player. They are the dominant player in the U.S. healthcare system. And because of that, you can see in this little chart down here, CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, are basically said value-based reimbursement will be the payment scheme of the future. They are mandating that all Medicare moves to value-based reimbursement over the next, say, 5 years. So currently, there are roughly 58 million people on value-based reimbursement plans. Most of them are not aware of it. It is generally an arrangement between the doctor and the insurance company. Most patients are not aware that they are on one of those plans. But, you know, the 58 million is expected to grow to 195 million, over 200 million people over the next 5 years. So there's tremendous growth here. And specifically, CMS is basically saying that, you know, there's a lot of value-based programs out there today that provide bonuses for doctors. So you get paid normally, and then if you do really well, you get a bonus. More and more of these programs are asking the doctors to take risk, meaning that if they don't perform well, they actually lose real money. And so that is very scary for a lot of the doctors out there. And a lot of the doctors don't trust how these programs are set up and don't have confidence that they can be successful. And so that's primarily what we're talking about today. So where is the money spent? So you can kind of see on the left chart, I included pharmacy down here, and this is a little dark. I apologize for that. Nearly 50% of the total healthcare spend is in pharmacy, but you don't go to your pharmacist and ask for a prescription, you go to your doctor. So the engagements between a patient and a doctor are known as encounters. So the encounters is really where you have to focus. And the allocation of spend, you can see over here, the bottom three categories are emergency room, hospital inpatient, and outpatient. So exactly 50% of the encounter spend is in the hospital. And broadly speaking, we can say none of us really want to go to the hospital. These are generally bad things that happen that cause people to go to the hospital. Sometimes it's planned, knee replacement, things like that. Sometimes you go to the emergency room, you get admitted to the hospital. But the important part is the primary care and specialists, which are these top two categories. So from a cost perspective, this is how it lays out. But from a number of encounters perspective, 60% of the time that a patient and a clinician interact is this primary care or specialist. In other words, this is where the industry is starting to call these the medical homes. So your primary care doctor is usually your medical home. If, for example, you have diabetes, it could be a specialist, an endocrinologist. If you're pregnant, it could be an OB-GYN. And then, you know, the cost drivers, this hospital inpatient has a grossly disproportionate impact on the cost. So in fact, what you see here is 2.5% of the claims that occur in the industry are nearly 50% of the total cost. And if you go into higher age groups, that percentage actually increases. So you're talking about a small number of claims. You see here, 0.02% of the claims is actually close to approaching 10% of the dollar, 0.04%. And so, you know, the ball game here is not trying to make incremental improvement across all of the claims, all of the encounters. It's trying to find and avoid those bad outcomes that drive costs. it's the NICU stay, neonatal intensive care unit stay after a birth. Those can be $1 million easily, $2 million in one single claim. Heart attacks are expensive. $100,000 is very easy to ring up during a heart attack. Diabetic admission due to poorly managed diabetes. And so really it is trying to find the needle in the haystack, trying to find where that needle is going to come from and really wreck your cost curve. And so what you need to do is you need to set up the program to manage the cost, to be able to proactively identify where the risk is and manage that risk to avoid bad outcomes that can incur high dollars. So the basic building blocks of value-based reimbursement, all value-based reimbursement programs consist of two pieces at least. There's a cost, and we were talking just about kind of where that cost is, and it's cost versus revenue. So obviously, if you have a Medicare patient, that tends to be higher revenue than a child on Medicaid. And so it's cost versus revenue. And what are the attributed costs there, which is the category we just looked at in the chart. And then it's not hard to reduce cost if you just deny care. If you basically don't provide the care, you can avoid cost. Now, you're not going to end up with the right results, but that's why there is always a quality component to value-based reimbursement. And the quality components are almost always measured as a ratio, a numerator over a denominator. And I've listed in green here are some positive ones. So preventative care, how many people got preventative care divided by the managed population? How many people received appropriate care of their chronic condition divided by the number of people that have that condition? There are also ratios that are negative, preventable events. Most people have heard of readmissions. Hospitals get dinged, they get charged for readmissions. How many readmissions per your population are occurring? And so there are many different ways this is set up, but the basic building blocks of value-based reimbursement consists of the cost and the quality. And then you go into word soup. Okay. These, if you don't know what these acronyms are, you're going to need to be successful in value-based reimbursement. HEDIS stands for, these are all acronyms. Certainly won't try to go through them all, but HEDIS is one of the most widely used ones. That stands for Effectiveness Data Information Set. And all of these things are ways that quality and risk are measured. So stars, you can look up a 5-star Medicare plan. HCC is how risk adjustment is done. So that basically says, make sure you're not penalizing a doctor because they happen to have sicker patients. This, in theory, evens the playing field so that there is fairness in the program. So be aware of all the acronyms, be aware of how they work, and make sure you've got somebody on your team that knows what these things are, knows how they're calculated, and because these are what, if you're a doctor, these are what you're going to be judged on. So 2 primary keys to the data here. I like to talk about the value creation side. This is actually, doing the better care, being proactive in taking care of chronic conditions, making sure that you're following the evidence-based medicine for that, coordinating care between the hospital, the specialist, the primary care doctor, the emergency room if the person's going there. But you can't forget about what I call the arbitrage and the bookkeeping side of this. This is one of the things that, generally speaking, and I'm stereotyping, but doctors hate the bookkeeping. They hate having to keep track of writing down every single little thing. But if you don't write it down in the medical chart, it didn't happen as far as value-based reimbursement is concerned. And so you've got to make sure you're doing this correctly. You've got to make sure that you're putting the diagnoses on claims. Many primary care doctors don't do that. That impacts risk-adjusted revenue. Chart pulls, something every doctor hates. It is routine now. Pretty much every Medicare plan in the country goes to every one of their doctors and says, "Hey, we'd like to do an audit of every single Medicare patient chart that exists." It's a bureaucratic nightmare. It costs the payer a lot of money. It costs the provider a lot of money. It is a relatively poor way of gathering data. And then also be aware of registries. Vaccinations is a classic example. There are state registries where vaccinations are put. Make sure you've got access to those so you can be aware of who has vaccinations and who does not. So you got to do the arbitrage, you got to do the bookkeeping, and you got to get that stuff right. Make sure that's in your team somewhere, and then work on the reason why most people go into healthcare, the value creation, the actual taking care of the patient and doing a good job at it. So 4 key points, and I'll cover these fairly quickly so we can get to questions. But one is make sure you're creating the right data. If you're a doctor, if you're running a practice, you are the source of many of the pieces of data that need to be collected for the value-based reimbursement. You've got to organize the data to be timely and actionable. Currently, if you're working in Medicare, you submit claims to Medicare, and 6 months later, you get the claims back with their analysis of how you're doing. 6 months is way too long. HEDIS is an annual exercise. You can't wait for a year to find out where you are, and especially because at that point there's nothing you can do about it. You've missed the opportunity. One of the things I think health information technology has failed on the most is using data to drive action and decisions. Usually in the industry, the data comes after the event, but you need to bring that data forward. Use it as you're actually delivering the care to drive action, to drive decisions, to make corrections in the moment, and be able to then make informed decisions. And then one of the things that doctors hate about value-based reimbursement is the scorekeeper. The scorekeeper is always the payer. Sometimes the payer is the government, sometimes it's a private insurance company, but that's always how value-based reimbursement is done. The scorecard is the key, and you've got to get the right data to that payer in order to get it there. So creation of the right data. I'm not going to read this. Please, read through it on your own. But do be aware you've got to create. They are often called registries or rosters. But first of all, know who has which conditions. There are specific quality measures for almost any chronic condition out there. COPD, congestive heart failure, diabetes, pregnancy, which isn't a disease, but it's a condition, and it has measures for it. Back pain. Make sure you understand what those cohorts are, and then get this stuff documented. We talked about that a little bit. Make sure that you are getting the codified results. So if you do a lab test and you just put in the notes in the chart that, hey, it looks like this person's hemoglobin A1C is high. Hemoglobin A1C is one of the primary measures for diabetes. That's not going to get captured. It's not going to get brought into the scoring mechanism. It's not going to. It's like it's like hitting a home run and not running the bases. You got to touch all the bases. So, and then one of the things is, once you start seeing where your problems are in value-based care, where you are in trouble, where you're struggling, you're going to have to engage with the patients to address that. Make sure you're measuring how that goes. Measure your outreach. see if it's working, find those patients that are activated, and see if you can create new ways of engaging and activating the patients so that they stay compliant. And then understand the admissibility rules. The data lags. There's always, you know, bureaucratic and administrative rules around what data is admissible, how it's admissible, etc. Specific example, in Medicare, if you put diabetes on the chart, that's enough. You can basically then tell the payer that this person has diabetes, and as long as it's on the chart, that's admissible. Under Medicaid and commercial programs, that's not enough. You've got to make sure that the data appears on a claim somewhere. It's got to appear on a claim in the year that the value-based reimbursement is being measured on. And so if it's not put on a claim, then it's like the person doesn't happen. You don't get the risk-adjusted revenue, so you're leaving money on the table, and you don't get credit for any of the quality scores that go with it. Organizing the data to be timely and actual. This is probably the number one thing. Is there's a lot of scorecards out there. There's a lot of dashboards out there. They tend to lag a lot. And you know, the first thing I talk to about doctors is, do you even know the list of patients you're being assessed on? And usually they can say, yes, I know. So average patient panel for a given doctor is 1,000 to 1,500 patients. It's a pretty big number. And usually they're pretty good about knowing maybe 900 of them. But then they get their scorecard back and they say, hey, you failed to manage these 100 patients. And the doctor said, I didn't even know I had those 100 patients. How come they're on my list? And the reason for this is, you know, it's a legacy technology problem. Most payers send doctors a monthly roster of their assigned patients, and they usually do it in Excel. You can download the Excel roster or CSV file. Okay, so if you have a 10 doctor practice, you receive an Excel file and it's got 10 to 15,000 lines on it. Okay, and you're supposed to say, you know, what changed, what happened, what's new. It's, you know, there needs to be some automation capability there, so you know what patients you're managing. You know, that's the starting point. And then, as I said before, clinical data in the EMR is not sufficient. You got to put it on the claim. You know, but also use the claims data. Doctors like to say that the EMR is the master. It is, but the measurement that the payer is doing is usually done from the claim. And so if data isn't making it from your EMR onto the claim via your billing process, you're probably not getting credit for it. And then also make sure you get alerts real time as much as possible. If somebody goes to the emergency room, I guarantee the payer knows within 24 hours. Almost every payer has a rule that a notification has to be sent from the hospital to the payer within 24 hours. If someone gets admitted to the hospital, same thing. Make sure that as a doctor practice, you're also getting that data. You can get it from the payer. They would be happy to share it because they want you as the doctor to manage those patients that are going to the ED, in the emergency room department. And they want to share that data so that you can be more successful. So again, finding out a month later, 6 months later isn't going to help you at all. You need to know close to real time, within a day. And then also keeping your systems up to date. ICD-10 is the standard for diagnosis codes in the industry. There's also HCPCS. There's a whole bunch of procedure codes. There's codes everywhere. And what's worse is they change quarterly. There's a quarterly publication of the new codes coming out. And if your system is not updated and you send in the wrong code, you're not going to get credit for it. They can be very specific. If you code the wrong vaccination, then you're not going to get credit for that vaccination. I was working in Missouri here with a bunch of the regional clinics, and they were sending in an old code for diphtheria, the DTP vaccine. And as a result, Missouri scored dead last in the country in terms of number of children vaccinated. It was wrong, but it's how the data was being measured. They weren't watching the scorecard. And so they said, well, you know, all the doctors said, well, you know what I meant. I put in DTaP, which was the old code. I meant DTP, but they didn't get credit for it, and it made the state look bad. It meant that those doctors didn't get bonuses. There were a whole bunch of implications there. Assuming you've got that alerting system set up, use the data to drive decisions, to drive actions. And this is, you know, not just the scorecard, the dashboard to say, hey, what generally is going on. Look at a patient-specific record and use the data for that patient to drive your decisions. Make sure that the patients aren't going to the emergency room. If they are, what can you do to help them go someplace else? You know, many payers send out care gaps. Doctors, generally speaking, hate those because they generally say they're very inaccurate. There was a study not too long ago about the impact of payers publishing care gaps to providers, and they say it improved care by up to 1%. Okay, by any reasonable measure, that's a terrible result. Okay, but that's partially because the payer data is old. Sometimes these care gaps can be old, but also it could represent, if you send a doctor a care gap saying this child is missing a vaccination, the doctor looks in the chart and says, no, the vaccination's right here. There's no credibility anymore. It could represent a coding problem, meaning that they didn't put the right code on the claim and therefore they're not getting credit. So care gaps could be coding gaps. So you have to be able to separate administrative, as I said, that administrative or that arbitrage from that value creation. You do have to work with others in the system. Specialists want to share their data back with the primary care doctors. Hospitals do not want a readmission. And if they want to share information with the primary care doctor, if they can help prevent that patient coming back for a readmission. Payers want to share the data. The government wants to share the data. There are government-based registries, etc. People get surprised at how much there is willingness to share data if basically it can help everyone be successful under these value-based scenarios. You do have to hold your teams accountable. It's not just the doctor. Make sure that your admissions clerk is correctly coding the patient information. Make sure your billing department is correctly coding the claims. So make sure that the data actually does represent what you think it should represent. And then every doctor I talk to says, yeah, the system's unfair. My patients are sicker. Sometimes that's true. But increasingly, value-based care systems have a risk adjustment built into them. Now, that doesn't capture everything. In particular, it generally only captures chronic conditions. And so take a look at it in the context of that risk adjustment, but then understand if there's something else going on. Specific example, one of the most common reasons why patients get readmitted to the hospital is they don't follow through on their discharge instructions. One of the most common reasons why they don't follow through on their discharge instructions is they didn't understand them. Let's just say their primary language is not English. Okay, that's a social determinant of health. And today, that does not factor into the risk adjustment. There is talk, and in fact, CMS announced a pilot where they might start bringing that into it. But you need to understand those social determinants as well as the clinical determinants like the chronic conditions to understand. And then finally, get the right data on the scorecard. You got to get the data to the payer. You got to make sure that the payer is reflecting it right, and you've got to be watching it constantly. You got to understand the rules on how the metrics are calculated. Sometimes they're very specific. Example again, HEDIS, which I said is one of the most common measures of how quality is measured. HEDIS generally requires a full year of eligibility. So if you're in a Medicaid program where eligibility changes several times a year, a lot of your patients that you're working so hard on may not qualify for a HEDIS measurement, and you may not be getting credit for those. Don't be dependent on retrospective chart chases. It's way overused in the industry. It contributes to a tremendous amount of wasted effort. And if you don't find what you're expecting to find in the chart, it's too late. You've missed the window. Chart chases are generally done in the spring, and spring after the year of measurement, and so it's too late. Okay, do look at the official scorecards, but payers may only give them to you quarterly. You've got to be able to reduce the cycle time. You've got to have an internal scorecard, an internal ability to measure where you are in the interim, and be able to use the two in conjunction to understand root cause. What's causing the problem here? Did I actually not do what the scorecard says I didn't do? Or does my record show that I did do it, and for some reason it's not making it through to the official scorecard? And then all of these quality metrics, all of these cost metrics, they're all graded on a curve. You are ranked on a percentile basis. And those benchmarks, those percentile anchor points, move every single year. So if you did really well, you scored in the 90th percentile for giving immunizations, that's great. But next year, that anchor point is going to move. So it might not be good enough next year. So understand how those are moving, and keep an eye on those. They get published quite frequently. So just wrapping up, kind of the overall ecosystem I'm talking about here is, you're going to have your payers out here. There's going to be average doctor deals with about 20 different payers. So it's a complex ecosystem. You've got your primary or specialty provider, which is usually the medical home. There are always the hospitals, the long-term care facilities, the institutional organizations. There's a pretty well-run system on how claims data goes back and forth and payments get back and forth. Doctors want to get paid. That part of the system works reasonably well. But what there is not is kind of this value-based reimbursement platform where you can land the data, look at the data, and make real-time decisions. It is not the electronic medical record. Electronic medical record is important. It will always be part of the solution. But primarily, EMRs are designed to be workflow engines, not reporting engines. So in other words, it helps the doctor in their interaction with that face-to-face patient interaction or telemedicine. It is not designed to provide insight and give you an alarm about the patient that you didn't see. You need something else, a value-based platform to set those alerts. So with that, I will wrap up and see if there's any questions that folks want to ask.
Hey, Glenn, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. I didn't realize how big of almost like the Wild West healthcare IT is. It's there's so much untapped territory. So a lot of opportunities for, companies to do some really unique things. Definitely a very red tape field, but, I think there's always ways to overcome those challenges. So let's see if we have any questions come in. In the meantime, I'd like to ask you a few questions. First off, where can people connect with you offline?
Sure. So I had it on the card. Maybe. Sorry.
No worries. I like to ask because everyone's different. Some people are Twitter, LinkedIn.
I had it on here. I can be found if you go to www.vedapoint, VEDAPOINTE.com. don't forget the E. That's our website.
Okay.
And I'm just Glen at VetaPoint.com.
Awesome. Sounds
So-
good. Great. Well, I will definitely be connecting with you after this, but question for you. So as we were wrapping up 2022, heading into 2023, what's one assumption or one prediction that you're going to make about, innovation in healthcare IT?
I think so. One prediction would be I had the opportunity to not only work in the U.S. system, but also I did some work in the NHS, which is Britain, Spain, Israel. I think healthcare IT in particular, has not taken advantage of the global market. There's a lot of innovation happening in other countries, and the startups in those other countries are desperately trying to figure out how to enter into the largest healthcare market in the world, which is the U.S. healthcare system. Some of them are figuring it out, and so this is changing from a regional game where you have to only worry about the folks in the U.S. to a global game, and I think that's going to be good for the system overall, but it's going to provide some shock as well.
Definitely. I agree with you. I definitely, I think this whole concept of collaborating versus competing, right? Because I think the healthcare market's just so big. Like healthcare's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think, in order for us to move forward as a society, we should be collaborating versus competing, right? I mean, there still could be friendly competition, but I think overall it's a matter of helping everyone build their buildings so you can build your, elevate your building to the next level versus trying to tear everyone else down and being the only building standing up.
I completely agree with that. There's well-designed value-based reimbursement programs are designed with the concept of a win-win. The provider should win. The primary care doctor should win. They should be able to get more money. The insurance company should win because they're spending less money. The patient should win because they're getting better health. The hospitals, some hospitals are afraid of this because as I said, we're trying to keep people out of the hospital unnecessarily. And yes, that does potentially mean less revenue in the short term, but those are doctors as well. They want their patients to be healthy. And so it can be a win for everybody involved done well. It shouldn't have to be a throat cutting competition.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And just a little personal side note, I had my first kid this past year, or December of last year, so she's about to be one. And, being an analytical person, when I got that hospital bill, I was like, just looking through it and just trying to wrap my head around, what are all these charges, right? Because I feel like at some point, I was trying to figure out, did we really need all these things, right? And I think with software and technology, it could help us become more efficient, understanding, educating. I think that those are big components of that are missing in healthcare that I see. Because I work with a lot of early stage startups at the accelerator that I run here in Dallas, and it's just a matter of taking the resources you have and being able to collaborate with other startups and leveraging them, right? Because I think that's as a partner, whether you are a healthcare physician or the insurance company, not only do you want to make it a win-win for them too, but you also want to make it a win for the the consumer, even though they don't really play a picture in the equation, but they're the people that either benefit or get put in a bad situation because of it.
No, that's exactly right. And there's some good innovation out there on the consumer side. I think it's a broadly undertapped market. Most, as discussed, whether you're in the U.S. or globally, the money is sitting in the doctor's hands, the hospital's hands, or the government's hands, or the payer. It rarely is sitting in the consumer's hands. But as I said, engagement of the consumer can make all the difference in the world of making sure someone stays healthy. And obviously, people are interested in keeping themselves healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. You are actually our last speaker. Our last speaker happened to, he lost his voice, so he won't be able to join us. So we have a few more minutes if you want to stick around. Last question that I have for you is, as far as, innovation within healthcare IT, like what niches are you seeing are starting to pick up pace or traction, and what areas need the biggest help?
So the I would say the biggest traction is in well, it's in direct technology. It's not in information technology. So people, vendors, startups tend to shy away because interoperating with the electronic medical record systems is incredibly difficult and also often very unfriendly. Many of the EMR vendors just do not want to open up their systems and make it accessible. So a lot of the current traction is outside of that, where you don't have to interact with that. That I would also say is the one of the biggest opportunities is many EMRs were implemented. Almost every doctor in the U.S. now has an electronic medical record system, but they put it in for the wrong reason. They put it in because they were paid by the government specifically to put it in. They weren't going in with the mindset of, this is going to improve the care of my patients and improve my productivity and allow me to deliver better care. They put it in because they were told to put it in. Now there is a kind of a rehash. Folks are now saying, hey, well, listen, we've actually got to make these systems work better, work for us, and help us with the data information. And so I do think there's tremendous opportunity in starting to tackle interoperability. It's been a phrase in healthcare IT for 20 years. We're still not there, but there's tremendous opportunity if you can tackle that. And then the other thing is telling folks to don't forget the administrative data that's out there. Claims data. Doctors don't like to look at claims data, but the payers broadly do better analytics than the providers. They're just better at it. And that's because the data is structured well, and it makes, every IT person loves getting clean data, and EMR data is never clean. Claims data is much cleaner. I won't say it's clean, but it's better. And so use that claims data to supplement, to augment your analysis. And that's where I think we're going to see a huge amount of traction over the next couple of years as these value-based reimbursement programs roll out.
So, I know I said that was the last question, but you just inspired a thought in my head. So, as far as for me, I have the luxury of being, on stage virtually or in real life with individuals like yourself. So I get to learn a lot and have really interesting conversations. And, value-based is something that's more of a new methodology, in the past, recent, months, maybe even year or two. I remember when I came across it working with a startup out of Silicon Valley. If someone were to get started in this field or want to get started in this field, what do you recommend? Where should they go to educate? How does someone get in this field?
Well, there's there's always the way I did it, which is jump in blindly and then come up for air as quickly as possible. There's a tremendous number of resources out there for how the coding, how all the data works, but it's incredibly confusing. Most of it is managed by the U.S. government, and it's very hard to mine that. So I would recommend start with the simple stuff and kind of work your way up. Pharmacy data is about the easiest thing to start with. It's transactional, it's mature. And candidly, I would also say, don't try to do analytics off an EMR as your first step. It's too confusing. It's too subjective. But I think there's been a bias in the healthcare industry that you can only hire IT people that have worked in healthcare because nobody else is going to get it. That mindset has to change. That's one of the reasons why healthcare technology has been so bad and is so far behind so many other industries. And so I would say the best thing to do is go forward courageously. Try it, experiment, learn from your mistakes. You'll make them, and keep going.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Any last parting words before we let you go for our audience?
I think the last speaker said it is there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for careers in health information technology. It is undermanned. The IT part is underfunded. And that's going to change, and not just change in the US, it's going to change globally. There's no country in the world that does HIT well, not one. And so I think it's a fantastic place for people to make a career. And I think it's a case where you're working on stuff that's important. All of us are concerned about our health. And so it can be a rewarding career. It can be financially rewarding, and it can be a lot of fun. It will also be frustrating from time to time.
I definitely, I agree with you. Healthcare is one of those things where, there's this phrase I heard a while back, and it was like, someone said to me, like, their goal in life was to make an impact while making an income. And I think that fits perfectly in healthcare, IT and whatnot, and even just healthcare itself. So thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. I really appreciate it. Stay warm,
Thank you for having me.
Safe travels. Absolutely. And I look forward to connecting with you offline. Have a great
Sounds
day.
good. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to wrap up. Unfortunately, our last speaker lost his voice and he won't be able to join us. So, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you to all the amazing speakers that joined us today. And I really look forward to hearing, and connecting with many of you offline. You can reach me either on LinkedIn, Javy D. Martinez, or on Twitter at Javy D with 2 V's and a Y. So I look forward to tomorrow, and everyone stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good one.